Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Oh, there you are, Mr. Reynolds, I said warmly. You're up bright and early, aren't you? You know what they say, early bird catches the worm. I could see Mr. Reynolds sitting down on the couch, seemingly staring rather vacuously into space. You don't want to sit in the dark like this, Mr. Reynolds, do you? Let me open the curtains for you, so you can enjoy the stunning views from outside. It's such a fabulously beautiful day outside today. I really love this time of year, here in Stowe. But let's not kid. April is out of season for those of us catering for the tourists. People love flocking to this part of New England in winter for all the skiing on offer, and I can fully understand why. You should have seen how lovely the Green Mountains looked last winter, all covered with snow. They were absolutely beguiling. It's quite understandably a tourist's dream to come skiing here in winter. Last year, me and my husband were doing some renovations to this place, so we weren't open to the public yet. It really did look like a winter wonderland out there, let me tell you. And with the large crackling fires, people will get to thoroughly enjoy this inn. I'm hoping by then business will be booming for us. And I do hope, Mr. Reynolds, you'll join us again in the winter season, as you're welcome here any time. Mr. Reynolds said absolutely nothing. He was a very quiet, unassuming man, and seemed to rather like listening to my voice as I chatted away. Well, at least I assumed he enjoyed it. I understood his wife would chat away at him when she was alive, and he enjoyed listening to her yabbering on, so why not me? I like to be a conversationalist, especially towards a quiet guest like Mr. Reynolds, who needed bringing out of his shell. Mr. Reynolds was our 13th patron who'd booked into the White Owl Inn since we'd opened 3 weeks prior. I was absolutely delighted we'd managed to attract a few people already out of season, when we hadn't even advertised yet. It would take a while before people learnt about our sumptuously cosy inn in Vermont, but hopefully word would spread around quickly, and before long we would do a booming trade, as after all, word of mouth is the very best form of advertising. Let's just say, during the course of our marriage, me and my husband Jordan had been longing to open up an inn for ourselves in Vermont, but it was not to be, as we went through a plethora of rather unfortunate financial hurdles. But when Aunt Bridget died, she left me a sizable amount of money, so that our dream about moving to New England from Buffalo in New York could be fully realized. It was a stroke of good fortune for us when by random chance a rather dilapidated property on a generous acreage of land had come up on the market at a steal, and me and Jordan, we snapped it up so fast we barely had time to even draw breath. It would sadly seem that the previous owner, due to an excessive drinking and opioid addiction, not uncommon in these parts I'm afraid to say, had unfortunately driven his family away from him due to his rampant out-of-control addictions. The man had lived in this house for many years, allowing the property to descend into ruin and rather bad decay, like someone who hasn't used a toothbrush for many years and allowed their teeth to rot in their own gums. Thankfully, a structural engineer assured us the foundations were still very good of the property. We had bought the place and spent the last year or so transforming the house and turning it into the White Owl Inn, with extensive renovations and help from an architect who turned the White Owl Inn into a classical, charming home from home for visitors looking to enjoy some romantic alpine elegance. Me and my husband were both retired, but still in our early 50s, so we were reasonably young. Running the inn was a way of bringing in money for us to support us in our old age, while enjoying the unparalleled beauty of the mountains. It seemed for us to be a win-win situation, and the quintessential opportunity to meet interesting people from all around the globe, who like to visit Vermont in the winter months to enjoy the idyllic scenery on offer and the skiing opportunities at this time of the year so obviously presented. The only drawback, of course, living in these parts is it can get bitterly cold in winter, where temperatures can really plummet to record lows. As we both came from Buffalo, where it can be incredibly freezing during the winter months, me and my husband Jordan knew how to conquer the demon of the cold to the best of our ability, even though it's never easy, mind you. The small town of Stowe, that some describe like a village, attracted tourists from all around the world to come skiing here in winter, although some people did visit us out of season in spring and summer, like Mr. Reynolds had done so, and it was something I wanted to actively encourage, as let's not kid, the fall here in Vermont is something spectacular to behold. There is nothing quite like it, when the trees allow their autumn foliage to turn into golds and reds. It is nothing short of breathtaking. It was over dinner the previous evening. The old man had opened up to us. Mr. Reynolds was in his 80s, but looked as healthy and robust as someone half his age. But I could see in his drooping shoulders and his sad little crinkled face that was like a road map, it was so heavily lined, that he was far from a happy man. I think unhappiness can really ruin our health, even if it's not visible to the naked eye. Mr. Reynolds told me that he walked regularly, and he seemed reasonably fit. He told us that Stowe was his late wife's favourite small town, which was why he kept coming back to this part of the world, to refresh his memories of the woman he'd loved so very much in life. When I walk down the streets in the village, with all the charming little vintage shops, it's very nostalgic for me, he told me, his face lighting up like a Christmas tree, that for a brief moment I could see a younger version of himself looking straight back at me, almost as if he'd just gone back in time, just for a second. He paused for a brief moment, drew in a deep breath, as if he was aching from the revelry. When me and my wife were younger, my wife would come skiing here regularly. She put me to shame, she did, on the skiing slopes, let me tell you. She was quite the natural in that regard, whereas I looked like a stumbling, clumsy old fool. I was never very good at skiing, and didn't particularly enjoy it either, but I pretended to, just for my wife's sake. What happened to your wife, Mr. Reynolds? I asked. Mr. Reynolds hung his head of grey hair sadly, his face suddenly looking very pinched and rather gaunt. Breast cancer, he said. The first time my wife was diagnosed, she made a full recovery. But the cancer, I'm afraid, came back with a vengeance, treacherously determined to take her down. And within weeks of her second diagnosis, my wife passed. She refused any chemo, you see, which might have prolonged her life for a couple of months or so. But it was an aggressive cancer, and my wife chose quality of life over quantity, if you know what I mean. A lot of people feel like that about chemo, Mr. Reynolds, I said. It can suck the life out of you, I believe. Many people decide they just can't take it, because theoretically chemo is actually a poison. I'm sure it is. It certainly sucked the life out of my wife. I remember her first cancer diagnosis, when she was on that chemo. She wasted away before my very eyes, because she couldn't eat a thing, was permanently throwing up. She lost all her hair, and felt lousy all the time. I think the chemo was killing her more than the cancer. But she did rise above it, and finally got her strength back. But her reviving health was regretfully rather short-lived. She was one of the unlucky ones, I suspect. I wish she hadn't died, and it had been the other way round. I thought I would be the one to go first. I was 3 years older than my wife. They always say women outlive men by 5 to 10 years. I'm afraid I'm not very good on my own. That's why I come to places like your lovely inn, to help keep me stimulated, or I'd probably die of lonely boredom if I sat at home in Queens, wallowing in my grief and feeling desperately sorry for myself. I can't even bring myself to throw out Molly's things, because it's like admitting that she's really gone. And I can't do that, because I need to believe she's still around me.
Mr. Reynolds, everyone grieves differently. And who's to say your wife isn't watching over you? I'm sure she is, I said kindly. When the time's right, you'll be able to deal with her clothes and give them to a charity, perhaps. But don't be hard on yourself. Everyone grieves differently, in their own time, and that's the way it should be.
That's the problem, dear. I don't know if the time will ever be right. I don't want to throw anything connected to my wife away. I try to keep myself as busy as I can, so I don't have to think about my wife too much. Or I become lugubriously sorrowful.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds. It can't be easy for you.
Well, don't feel sorry for me. It is what it is. Everybody ends up in my predicament. Someone always outlives the other. It's the way it's always been.
I felt really sorry for poor Mr. Reynolds, because he seemed so melancholic. It would seem his wife Molly had died 5 years prior, and since then he'd become very lonely, especially as his only adult daughter, of similar age to me and my husband, had moved to Ireland over 25 years ago to get married, and her 3 adult children, that were Mr. Reynolds' grandchildren, had all long since left home, but still lived in Ireland. Mr. Reynolds felt very alone in the world, and who could blame him for that?
I didn't know what loneliness was,
he told us over the dinner table that night,
until Molly died. And with my daughter living abroad so far away in Ireland, it wasn't easy. She wanted me to move there to be with her after my wife passed. But I've lived in America all of my life, and I wasn't about to move away to pastures new. Not at my age, anyway. The change would be such a shock to the system. It might actually kill me, he joked.
Well, that's perfectly understandable, Mr. Reynolds. North America is your home. You've made so many lovely, wistfully nostalgic memories here with your wife, Molly. Why would you ever want to leave this place?
That's exactly what I told my daughter. You took the words right out of my mouth, said Mr. Reynolds. She said home isn't a place, it isn't a country, it's family. And I suppose she's right to a certain extent.
As I pulled back the curtains and plumped up a couple of cushions on one of the settees that had been squashed down from the previous night, where me and my husband had sat down after dinner to enjoy a hearty conversation with Mr. Reynolds, I was delighted the elderly man had really opened to us over that evening meal. It had been so good getting to know this charming gentleman. I glanced up at Mr. Reynolds and flashed him a bright, very warm smile, but I realized he hadn't been listening to a single word I'd been saying. He seemed to continually stare out into space, his eyes shielded behind silver-rimmed glasses that he always wore. I thought the elderly man was obviously lost in his thoughts. Was he thinking longingly about his wife Molly? I privately wondered. Poor man, he really was a tormented soul, grieving her loss even 5 years on. There are some things in life we can never get over or escape. I glanced briefly around the living room, delighting in its elegant alpine decor. I couldn't help rather smugly thinking to myself that me and my husband Jordan had done an outstandingly fabulous job in transforming the White Owl Inn. I knew it was our unique, magic, artistic touches to the inn that had made it feel so warmly welcoming to all our guests. I had industriously picked up some fine collectible pieces of vintage furniture at antique shops all around Vermont, where I'd bought some unique-looking eclectic treasures that had already been admired by the first few guests that had recently stayed at the inn. I had married everything together so resplendently, using rich, warm autumn colours like deep reds, golds, pinks and russets, much like the Vermont countryside itself in fall, to give that inn a warm, cosy, countrified atmosphere. Several people had asked me who my interior designer was. It made me feel remarkably accomplished, as I had decorated the entire inn myself from top to bottom. I did not want to go needlessly splashing money on a designer, when I was naturally quite creative myself. Also with interior designers, they often do things very stiffly, according to a standard, rather regimental protocol that will appeal to a lot of people, and sometimes in that approach, individuality can be sadly lost. I was desirous to make the White Owl Inn uniquely personal, so there wasn't an inn quite like it. I had chosen to call it the White Owl Inn, as on the first night we moved into the inn, when I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, a white owl spontaneously flew onto the tree branch opposite the kitchen window, where it happily perched, staring at me through its bright yellow eyes. I thought he was the most spectacular bird I had ever seen in my entire life, and the extraordinary bird executed this bizarre, rather incongruous behaviour for an entire week, almost as if it was welcoming us both to the inn. That was when the name for our inn was born. On this very alluring, rather pretty unassuming morning, shafts of beautiful sunlight spilled lackadaisically through the living room windows, casting shades across the recently renovated wooden floors, where thick colourful woolen rugs made the living room look so inviting. "Ah, that's better, isn't it, Mr. Reynolds?" I said with a smile that could be heard in my voice. "We can't have you sitting in the dark like this, can we? It's such a lovely day out there. Now, what would you like for breakfast? I'll tell you what I've got. I could make you a continental, with croissants and jams and stuff like that. Or a full English with eggs, bacon, the works. Or an American breakfast with pancakes, maple syrup and crispy bacon. You choose. What would you like, Mr. Reynolds?" Mr. Reynolds failed to answer me. I wondered if he was suddenly hard of hearing. But it was profoundly odd, the way Mr. Reynolds seemed to be staring straight ahead of himself rather absent-mindedly beneath his glasses. Well, so I thought. I couldn't see him very clearly, as a blast of glaring sunlight made me narrow my eyes into a squint, so the shadow of Mr. Reynolds sitting up on the sofa seemed ambiguously obscure. I padded over the thick pile rug towards the sofa where he was sitting. Perhaps he had drifted off into a light sleep, I thought. So I raised my voice in the hope he'd hear me, wondering if I was rude to wake him up from his nap. But then again, if Mr. Reynolds wanted breakfast, I wanted to get on with it, as I had a plethora of chores I needed to do. "Mr. Reynolds, what would you like for breakfast? Mr. Reynolds? Mr. Reynolds?" The man seemed very quiet and was completely unresponsive to me. It was in that moment I knew something was terribly wrong, and seized with a great sense of trepidation, I began to shake Mr. Reynolds rather vigorously. "Mr. Reynolds! Mr. Reynolds, are you all right?" The old man failed to respond, and when his glasses slipped off his face after I had shaken him, where they landed on the pile rug, close up I observed his eyes were vacant and glazed over. "Please God, no! This couldn't be happening! Mr. Reynolds, wake up! Mr. Reynolds, wake up!" But the man did not respond to me. It was then that I felt for a pulse, and realized how cold he was, and how grey his skin had actually become. My burgeoning hope just plummeted, and I realized Mr. Reynolds was almost certainly dead, and by the look of things he might have been dead for some time, although I couldn't be sure, as I was no expert in these matters. At that precise moment I let out a muted wail that sounded more like a cat being strangled than of human origin, and its piercing shrill rang through the house and got my husband's attention, as after a thumble of desperately fast footsteps dashing down the staircase, my husband finally entered the living room, seemingly relieved to see that I was still in one piece, because judging by my scream, it had made him believe otherwise. "What the hell is wrong, love?" said Jordan, looking flustered. "You scared the bejesus out of me, screaming like that. Don't you ever do that again. I thought you were being killed or strangled to death." My husband looked refreshed after his shower, but the expression on his face showed me that my scream had sent the fear of God shooting through every single cell in his body. I could pick up the citrus notes of his aftershave, and his hair was still damp and neatly combed back. As usual, Jordan looked immaculately turned out, wearing a pair of comfortable loafers and a caramel pair of chinos, with a navy button-down shirt. My husband's thick hair was still as black as a raven's, so he looked more as if he was in his early 40s rather than middle 50s, and it certainly helped that he had a baby face. I, on the other hand, Rather clandestinely masked my greyness with a very clever, rather fetching auburn hair dye that I thought looked rather good with my pale skin and blue eyes. And from time to time, I will admit, I did surrender to the enticements of Botox procedures to ensure that the line between my brow that made me look like an angry schoolmistress would be kept at bay. But I never did anything to my appearance too much, as I didn't want to be devoid of any facial expression. "What the hell is going on?" my husband continued. He looked from me to Mr. Reynolds sitting back on the chair, almost as if he was expecting Mr. Reynolds to answer him and to explain what had just happened. I stood in the living room, pointing at the old man. I whispered to my husband, almost as if I was afraid that the very walls of the inn would hear my confession. "Mr. Reynolds, he's dead! He's dead, Jordan! He's dead!" "Dead?" said my husband, looking taken aback by this startling, rather disquieting revelation. "But are you sure?" "I'm telling you, he's dead, Jordan," I repeated, putting a hand over my mouth. "What are we going to do?" I wailed. My husband rushed over to the old man to examine him more closely, and much like I had done, he began shaking Mr. Reynolds and checking for a pulse. He looked up at me to affirm my worst fears. "He's long gone, I'm afraid." My husband began fumbling around in the pocket of his caramel-coloured chinos to pull out his rather swanky cell phone. "I think he must have had a heart attack. We better call the emergency services at once. Although it's too late for Mr. Reynolds to go to hospital, he'll have to go to the mortuary." I'm not proud of myself for what I did next, but I couldn't help myself. In my defence, I will say this. For me, opening the White Owl Inn was a dream come true. I was terribly afraid if people learned that someone had died at the White Owl Inn, it could potentially ruin our business. Whether I was right about this, I didn't really know, but it was always better to be safe than sorry. I had my heart set on making this place a huge success. Much as I really liked Mr. Reynolds, I couldn't allow his deceased body in our living room to be the reason people chose other inns over ours when it came to booking arrangements for the winter seasons. "You can't do that," I said, grabbing my husband's hand. "You can't phone the emergency services." I snatched his cell phone away from him. "You can't do it." "Well, not yet anyway. We've got to talk about this first." "What on earth are you talking about, love? You're making absolutely no sense. It's obvious Mr. Reynolds has had a heart attack, a fatal one. The poor man has been dead for hours. There's no way we can bring him back now. We need to call the emergency services at once. That's what you always do in a situation like this." I began to wave a warning finger at my husband. "No, you can't! You can't do that, Jordan!" I barked at him. "Mr. Reynolds is long dead. No one can save him now. If you phone the emergency services and word gets out that Mr. Reynolds died at our inn, imagine how catastrophic that will be for our business, Jordan. It's hardly an auspicious start for us when we've barely even opened our doors to the public. And then this happens." "It's not ideal," admitted Jordan, "but we can't exactly do anything about it, can we? The old man chose to pop his clogs in our living room on the sofa. It is unfortunate, but it is what it is. When did you last see him alive? Can you remember, love?" "Last night when I went to bed. He was still sitting down here. He was reading a book." I pointed to the Dick Francis book that was lying half open on the coffee table. "Mr. Reynolds bid me good night. He said he suffered from insomnia and wanted to turn in later after he read a little more. I asked him if I could make him a cup of cocoa. He said that would be very nice. I made him a warm cup of cocoa with some marshmallows on the top, and I brought it in to him. We talked a little. He took a couple of sips of cocoa, saying it was absolutely delicious. He was saying how he wished his wife, Molly, could have stayed in the inn, as she would have really loved this cosy place and the way we've done it up. Then he went on to say that he'd really enjoyed his walk in the woods yesterday afternoon. He reckoned he wasn't alone on his walk, Jordan. He told me he felt watched all the time and was certain that someone had been following him in the woods. I told him that I was sure that that couldn't be true. He's a nice man, Jordan, but maybe he's a little delusional. There's no way anyone could have been following him. This is private property, isn't it? Unless, of course, we've got an unwelcome visitor camping out there on the land. But that's so unlikely at this time of the year. It's still reasonably fresh in the mornings. No one could be camping out there now."
"He told you that?" said Jordan, looking rather bewildered. "People don't usually imagine that someone is following them, unless they're extremely paranoid, or unless someone actually is. I don't think Mr. Reynolds was ever the paranoid type. The wood grove is very peaceful here. I doubt anyone could have been watching him."
"Well, maybe when you spend a lot of time alone and then walk in the woods surrounded by so much indigenous wildlife, if any of that wildlife is paying attention to you, like a bird in the trees, or a squirrel perhaps, maybe you can feel their stares perhaps."
"I don't think, love, that would explain the feeling Mr. Reynolds had of being watched," said Jordan. "How did he seem to you, love, when you were about to go to bed last night? I didn't hear you because, as you know, I was working upstairs, calculating some figures concerning our business, and some of the bills we need to pay. I know over dinner he seemed cheerful enough to me. He talked a great deal about his late wife, and said recently he'd been having vivid dreams of her that made him very happy. I wonder if he had some kind of prognostication that he was nearing the end of his life. That can sometimes happen to people, you know."
"Well, I don't know about that, Jordan. Let's just say last night he was very talkative, quite cheerful really, in a very good mood. When I bid him good night, he was in great spirits and said he'd got to an exciting part in his book and Dick Francis was his all-time favourite author. He did say that. He was like he'd been when he was enjoying dinner with us. I then just retired to bed. All I can say, Jordan, is thank God we have no one else staying at the inn with us at the moment. Imagine if they were to wake up in the morning only to discover that one of the guests had popped his clogs overnight. It would be like something out of a horror movie, wouldn't it?" My husband looked at me through his steely eyes, with a rather confounded expression on his face that surprisingly I couldn't read. I had no idea what he was thinking, but it was as if he was deeply locked in thought.
"Well," said Jordan reflectively, "let's just say Mr. Reynolds has been dead for quite some time, I think. I see he didn't drink all his cocoa, which is still on the coffee table in that mug. My guess is he must have passed away shortly after you returned to bed, which means he's possibly been dead for about 10 hours or so."
"You have to get rid of the body, Jordan. You have to get rid of it. We can't have people learning he died on this sofa in our living room, where guests will be sitting around the fireplace on a cold winter's night. They don't want to think that someone died where they're sitting. Imagine that!"
"What the hell are you talking about, sweetheart? I can't possibly get rid of Mr. Reynolds' body. Are you absolutely insane? If I do that, it'll look like I have something nefarious to hide. Almost as if in some way I'm responsible for his untimely death."
"Don't be silly. I'm not asking you to do that, Jordan. We can take the body to the woods, carry it in there, leave it on the ground. Tell the police we found Mr. Reynolds there. I don't want him in the house, Jordan. I'm sorry. I've worked so hard for this business, and a dead body found on our sofa could literally destroy it. I'm sure when the coroner does her autopsy, she'll say he suffered from a massive coronary heart attack. But at least if he died in the woods and not in this house, I don't think it'll impact our business in the slightest."
"You really think it makes such a difference where someone dies?"
"Of course it makes a difference. A huge difference, Jordan. Tell me something. If you and I were going to stay at an inn in Vermont, and you heard one of the guests had died on the sofa in the living room in one of those inns, how would you feel about booking that inn for your alpine adventure? Wouldn't you prefer to choose another one?" My husband was silent for a brief moment, as he thought about my question long and hard. Finally he said,
"Well, you've got me there, sweetheart, by the short and curlies. I really don't know how to answer that question of yours. It's a good one. I don't really know how I would react in the circumstances. I guess some people might not be at all bothered about someone dying at the inn. Others won't like it one single bit. You're right, we have to move the body. I can tell the police we both went out for our morning walk. Our guest wasn't up and about, and we assumed he was either sleeping in late or had taken an early brisk walk himself. I think we can get away with saying that. We are going to have to shift Mr. Reynolds' body from the sofa onto a plastic tarpaulin
and load him up onto the back of the 4-seated ATV, which I will drive into the woods. We will drag him on the plastic tarpaulin from the ATV, placing him on the walking trail, so it looks as if he collapsed on the ground after having a very bad coronary arrest. I'm warning you, love, a dead weight is pretty hefty, so this is a formidable task for us to undertake. Are you really up for it? Do you really want to do this? I frowned at my husband, as if he was asking a stupid question, and snapped, Do we have a choice in the matter, Jordan? There is no choice. There is no way anyone could possibly know that Mr. Reynolds died in our living room. They just can't. Besides, I'm reasonably strong, and Mr. Reynolds is not such a big man, is he? We will manage one way or another. I understand how you feel, love. Certainly, if it means so much to you that we deposit his body in the woods, then we will do just that. Once the body is examined by a medical examiner in an autopsy, all suspicions as to the manner in which he died will be erased, when it is declared that Mr. Reynolds must have had a bad heart attack. Luckily, a medical examiner will be likely to determine the cause of death, which will automatically rule out foul play. All we are doing is moving a deceased body. And that's hardly a crime, is it? Said my husband, sounding as if he was trying to convince himself of this fact. Of course it's not a crime. The man is dead. He's beyond saving now. Poor Mr. Reynolds, I said, looking down at the old man, allowing a couple of tears to now spill down my cheeks. You know, I really liked him a lot, Jordan. He was such a sweet gentleman. And now this has to happen to him. Why does life have to be so desperately unfair? Hasn't the poor man been through enough already, losing his wife? And now he has to die as well. My husband took me lovingly into his arms and held me tightly. He kissed the top of my auburn curls. I think he's probably happy to be gone, love, if I'm being brutally honest. Look at how sad he's been. He's been grieving the passing of his wife for the last 5 years or so, and that's a hell of a long time to be very sad. I think he enjoyed the evening meal we had together last night. You were very good with him, like you always are with our guests. I think it was a release for him, getting his grief off his chest and talking about his late wife. My bet is he's meeting up with his wife now in heaven, and that's going to be one hell of a reunion for him. I'm sure he's in a much better place now, and would never ever want to come back, even if he was given the choice. You really believe that? I asked my husband incredulously. Well, I want to believe that, love, because if this is all there is, then life is a sad lot, is it not? There has to be more to life than just existing for 100 years or a lot less until you exist no more. It would make absolutely no sense, would it, if this was all there was? No, I suppose you're right, I agreed, turning my attention to the deceased body on the couch. I have to say there really was a peaceful expression on Mr. Reynolds' face that I hadn't even observed before, although his body was more like a shell, as his essence had all but gone. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds, to have to do this to you, I said, taking his cold hand in mine and giving it a squeeze. I hope you don't mind us putting you in the woodgrove. It's very pretty in there. It's just if anyone was to find you had kicked your clogs on our sofa in the living room, it won't be good for our business. And, well, our business could descend into oblivion. And I know you wouldn't want that for us, would you, Mr. Reynolds? You're a good man. It's been a pleasure having you to stay with us at the White Owl Inn. We'll never, ever forget you. It was a laborious struggle, heaving Mr. Reynolds' body onto a plastic tarpaulin and then putting him on the back of our 4-seater ATV so that my husband could drive him into the woodgrove. I had no idea that moving a dead body could be such back-breaking work, but it really was. However, this needed to be done. I couldn't imagine the articles in the Vermont Standard or Burlington Post saying, 85-year-old Mr. Reynolds from Queens in New York was tragically found lying dead on a sofa at the White Owl Inn, where he was staying over the weekend. No foul play is suspected. It is believed he suffered from a massive coronary heart attack. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, were very sad about his tragic passing, describing him as a very nice gentleman. They have only just opened their doors to the public after a year of renovating the property. It once belonged to the Tucson family and had been left in a dilapidated state.
Mr. Reynolds leaves behind a daughter and 3 grandchildren that currently reside in Ireland. He will be sorely missed. This is a very inauspicious start for the couple, hoping to cash in on the tourist industry in the skiing season.
Let's just say I doubted that people would be breaking down our doors, even if we offered a holiday special, in the event of hearing such sobering news. No, I couldn't afford any bad publicity. Not like that. I was certain that kind Mr. Reynolds would be quite happy for us to shift his body for a short while anyway, as after all it didn't serve him any longer, did it? It must have been about 9:30 in the morning when we dropped Mr. Reynolds off in the woodgrove, after some exhaustive heaving and grunting on our parts. This was not a job for the faint of heart, and I could only thank God that Mr. Reynolds was a slim man. I dread to think if we would have managed if he had been twice his size. We placed Mr. Reynolds on the walking trail in the woods, yards away from a lofty tree, with branches bursting with brand new spring foliage. I think we rather successfully made Mr. Reynolds look as if he'd fallen over after having a massive coronary arrest.
You need to stay here, sweetheart. Watch over the body of Mr. Reynolds, my husband told me. I'm going to go back to the house to park the ATV in the garage and to put the plastic tarpaulin sheet away. Then I will call the police. I will say we didn't take our cell phones with us on our walk. So I told you to stay with the body while I went to call them for help. I'll be the one that chaperones the police directly to the woods to show them where the body of Mr. Reynolds can be found. If you could scatter some of those leaves that have been shifted by the sheet we moved, that would look a whole lot better. We don't want to look like we moved the body ourselves, do we?
But do you have to go? Can't I come back with you? I said, not liking the idea of being left on my own in the woods.
No, sweetheart, you stay here. It's much better that way. I won't be very long. I will need to show the police where the body is when they arrive at the inn. I will tell them I've left you watching over it. Remember our stories. We mustn't contradict each other. We went for a walk together in the woods, and were very shocked to stumble across the deceased body of Mr. Reynolds. We think he must have suffered from a heart attack. We don't know very much about the man, other than he's from Queens in New York, and his wife Molly died 5 years ago, and his daughter lives in Ireland, and is married with 3 grown-up children that have now left home. Understood? That's all we know.
I nodded rather reluctantly, feeling a terrible sense of guilt for having moved Mr. Reynolds' body in the first place. But we really didn't need the wrong kind of publicity for our inn, before we'd even established a good name for ourselves. I hoped what I had done didn't make me a bad person in any way. It would seem 13 was definitely an unlucky number for us, as Mr. Reynolds was our 13th guest. He had died in the living room at our inn. Why was 13 so unlucky for me? Fine, I'll stay here then. But for goodness sake, please don't be long. Of course, I understood that it made perfect sense for my husband Jordan to go back to the White Owl Inn, to call the emergency services, and then to chaperone the police to where Mr. Reynolds' body could be found. But I, for one, didn't like hanging around the deceased corpse, waiting for my husband's soon return. I began to awkwardly shift leaves around the path, removing any tread marks that had been created by the ATV, so the ground itself looked reasonably undisturbed. It was a beautiful morning. The pretty sunlight spilled magnanimously through the woodland canopy, while creeping ferns, shrubs, and flowering shade-loving plants eagerly cascaded on the forest floor in a tangled confetti of prepossessing foliages. The plants lapped up the spring sunshine almost as greedily as I did. I was enjoying the congenial warmth that brushed against my shoulders and face. It certainly wasn't easy to appreciate this idyllic setting right now, in which I stood, where a lone squirrel had stopped nibbling its acorn on a tree branch and appeared to be staring at me rather curiously through its very dark, soulful eyes, and then it hurriedly scurried away. It seemed like all the beauty of this beguiling morning had been cruelly lost by the rather harrowing sight of Mr. Reynolds' deceased corpse that had put a damper on everything. In truth, the corpse was beginning to look like a mannequin, lying there over a plethora of leaves, with eyes fixed and vacant. I noticed Mr. Reynolds' mouth was hanging open, as if he was yawning rather widely. I had wanted to close the man's eyes and mouth to make him look more dignified in death, but my husband Jordan had wisely insisted that we must have as little contact with the dead body as possible, and I suppose that made perfect sense. We needed to leave him be, but I did replace the glasses on his face, as it would have looked rather odd if he had not been wearing them. It was after my husband had left the woodgrove that I noticed the bird song in the forest had become strangely mute. Everything was dauntingly quiet, so much so that I could actually hear a pin drop. I had walked into this woodgrove on a plethora of occasions, and never known it to feel so unsettling like this. Every part of my body wanted to run away from the woods as fast as I possibly could, and return to the safety of the White Owl Inn, because something felt seriously off. I knew I couldn't leave the woodgrove. I had resolutely given my husband my solemn word that I would stay here faithfully in the woods, as I awaited his arrival with the police. It was the least I could do in the circumstances. My husband had agreed to move Mr. Reynolds' body, even though it was against his will to do so. I think Jordan understood that running the White Owl Inn had been a dream of mine, and the last thing we needed was a story to circulate around the entire town about a death in the inn, as an event like this would surely sabotage our business. Even if I was wrong about this, as far as I was concerned, it was so much better to be safe than sorry. It was when I heard the ponderous footsteps thumping across the forest floor and moving towards me that my heart almost stopped beating. Someone was coming, and it couldn't have been my husband, because they were walking in the opposite direction to where he'd gone, and furthermore my husband wouldn't be back this quickly. Whoever they were whistling contentedly to themselves. I do remember Mr. Reynolds telling me, shortly before I retired to bed that night, that he'd been certain that on an afternoon casual walk in the woodgrove he had been sure he was being watched, and that someone was stalking him. I had thought the old man delusional. Now I was not so sure. Maybe someone had been spying on him after all. I knew unequivocally someone was coming my way. That was without doubt. It occurred to me that a vagrant could be camping in our woodgrove, even though it was still rather chilly. And what if he wasn't right in the head? Some mentally ill, disturbed people lived on the streets. Everyone knew that. They camped out in the wilderness at times, and our woodgrove would be the perfect place to hide. Let's just say here in Vermont, unknown to a lot of tourists that come to this part of the world, there has been an underbelly of crime that has been clandestinely hidden from all visitors, as none of the locals want their businesses to be affected negatively by any unsavory decay that has taken hold here in Vermont. But then again, all over North America, there are pockets of crime, wherever you look. Let's just say I have heard of people being killed in cold blood by armed robbers, who are looking for resources to support unbridled drug habits. So was I a little alarmed that the person coming my way might not be of sound mind? Of course I was. On one occasion, over a year ago, I had fortuitously stumbled across some used needles here in the woods, along with an old sleeping bag lying snagged among some bushy brambles, not to mention quite a few bottles of alcohol that were now all empty. First and foremost, whoever was walking around in the woods right now, whistling to themselves nonchalantly, he or she was definitely trespassing. It was these disquieting thoughts that promptly persuaded me to hide behind a tree, as I heard the person's approach. I knew when the police came to remove the deceased body of Mr. Reynolds from the forest floor, I would tell them that someone illegal was hanging about our property, and hopefully they would tell the man, him or her, to go at once, although I hoped they wouldn't be accused of a crime they did not commit. But then again the autopsy would reveal that Mr. Reynolds' death was due to natural causes, I assured myself. The footsteps got uncomfortably closer and closer. I decided the person coming my way was very definitely of a hefty build and robust stature, because the ground heaved, groaned, and vibrated under their powerful weight and beneath their solid boots. I could hear the snapping of twigs and branches, the rustling of leaves. A lighter person wouldn't make such a disturbing noise. What happened next blew my brains almost out of my head, as if someone had pulled the trigger and fired a bullet into my head. If I had thought Mr. Reynolds was delusional when he thought someone had been following him around the woods the day prior, I was now seriously beginning to think that I was the one in serious jeopardy, because what I was seeing with my naked eyes just could not be real. I rubbed my eyes impulsively, as if willing away the build-up of cobwebs that were clearly distorting my vision. Yet I knew what I was seeing was not a figment of my imagination, but how I wished it was. At first I observed a lofty dark silhouette emerging through the foliage onto the walking trail. It was on closer scrutiny and examination that the ambiguous shadowy figure began to take a solid form, while my eyes adjusted to what I was seeing. It was almost like my mind refused to agree with my eyes, and they were challenging each other in an open but argumentative debate. My eyes were saying to my mind, "This is real," but my mind was saying, "No, it's not." In the end, my eyes won out, the battle of doubt, that is, because I knew what I was seeing was real. There was no doubt. There he was, standing on the woodland trail, a Herculean-sized male Bigfoot. Moments later, a female joined him from behind. I was naturally surprised by this. I was so sure I had only heard one set of feet moving through the trees. The male Bigfoot looked confounded, somewhat bemused, when he stared down at the deceased corpse of Mr. Reynolds. He stood there solemnly, while a sausage-sized finger of his began to scratch his head, as though he was locked deep in thought, like someone trying to resolve a rather awkward problem. I don't believe for a single second that he was best pleased to see a deceased corpse on the footpath. The female stood at his side, equally as bemused. Two of them began to talk to each other, backwards and forwards in an earnest conversation. I knew they were discussing Mr. Reynolds' corpse, as if it presented a major problem for them, as it had done for me in my living room. I noticed the male Bigfoot was much, much larger than the female, by at least a couple of feet, and he was twice as wide as her. He was so much more densely muscular than she was. But they were both, without any doubt, absolutely enormous in girth and height, covered in dark brown hair, similar in colour to a black bear. Most disturbing of all was how human their faces actually were, and how incredibly intelligent they seemed. "Tulokati, hakila koto, amakata, oloboni." "Ah, vinatala, hoshakatilada, hokulibadi, hamatali nugo, akisa, atilakani, okuliba, ah, shinatwa." At one point I thought my cover might be blown, when the female Bigfoot pointed towards the tree, where I was hiding, and appeared to be saying something to the male Bigfoot. "Kalikati, atilakati no kolopo, ani, asaka." The male looked towards the tree where I was hiding, and appeared to be shaking his head rather vigorously. What that meant, I had no idea. Did the Bigfoot know that I was hiding in their midst? Did they both know? I began to inwardly panic, as I was terrified of how these creatures might react if they were to see me. To all intents and purposes, if the Bigfoots knew I was there, they chose to ignore me and leave me well alone, which is something I was eternally grateful for. I certainly didn't fancy a close-up encounter with either one of them, especially as they were the most intimidating creatures I have ever beheld. I would likely faint from the shock. Even my legs seemed to be crumbling beneath me, just from observing them from a vantage point. The two imposing, very formidable-looking Bigfoots seemed to be arguing among themselves for a while, much like me and my husband Jordan had done earlier on in the living room. "Kitani kali koto matilati ogona pa hilati lakwa himpotono pilati kakulokotona akina ah manita hikotolo ban." What happened next completely took me off my guard. The male Bigfoot squatted onto his large knees and then threw Mr. Reynolds' body over his shoulders like a very small sack of potatoes, and then began to walk away, with the female Bigfoot at his side, while he continued to whistle happily to himself, and finally they were gone from my sight. And so was the deceased body of Mr. Reynolds, I'm afraid. What were they going to do with him? Please God, they weren't going to eat him, were they? I immediately ran out of the woodgrove, waiting for the police to arrive,
because there was no way on God's earth I could tell them what I'd seen. It was better, so much better, to pretend that I was as confounded as they were about the disappearance of Mr. Reynolds' body. When they discovered it was all but missing, there are some things you would be wise not to talk about. I'd almost made my way back to the White Owl Inn when I saw my husband Justin talking to two uniformed officers. I observed a police car parked in our driveway, along with an ambulance, where two ambulance EMTs were chatting away together. "Oh, there she is," said my husband, unable to disguise the frown on his face. "I thought I told you to stay with the body, love. What are you doing here?" "I didn't want to stay with it. I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. It freaked me out. It gave me the creeps." One of the officers, a man with silvery hair, looked at me kindly. "Ma'am, that's perfectly understandable in the circumstances. Some people are not remotely comfortable around the dead. You can stay here at the inn if you like, while me and your husband go and observe this body you're talking about. What exactly happened, ma'am?" he asked me. "Can you tell me everything you know about your guest staying with you at the White Owl Inn? Anything you can tell us will make our jobs a whole lot easier." The officer's direct questioning took me rather by surprise. "Well, he's a very sweet man, officer. Well, he was a sweet man, put it that way. But he was very sad, if you know what I mean." The officer pulled out a black spiral-bound notebook and a pen from his pocket and scribbled down a few notes rather hurriedly. "Sad, ma'am? What do you mean by sad? Are you saying he was suicidal or something?" "No, nothing like that. Well, at least I don't think so. His wife Molly died 5 years ago, you see, from breast cancer. His daughter, who's in her 50s, is living in Ireland, I believe, with her husband, and she has 3 grown-up kids. He has no family living here in America. He was telling us last night over dinner how lonely he gets at times, and how he couldn't bring himself to throw out his wife's clothing, because then he had to admit to himself that she was really gone. He said he wished he'd gone first before she did, because he finds life a struggle without her. But that doesn't mean he's suicidal. He's just sad, melancholic, I think." "That is very sad indeed. So you don't think the man was suicidal, or attempted to take his life, do you, ma'am?" "Absolutely not. I very much doubt that." "I have to say it's never easy for the one left behind to pick up the pieces of their lives after a spouse has died. What was his full name, ma'am? Do you know how old he actually was?" "Well, I do know his name was Ian Reynolds, and that he turned 85 on the 23rd of April. So his birthday was about 2 weeks ago, wasn't it?" The officer continued to scribble down some notes. "I'm very impressed with you, ma'am, that you know so much about your guest staying with you. I have to say not many people in your line of business can tell us very much about the people staying with them. Do you know where Mr. Reynolds was from by any chance? Anything you can tell me will be enormously helpful." "Well, I know he was from Queens, officer. Queens in New York, if that helps. I'm sure his ID and stuff like that is in his bedroom suite here at the inn, and of course you're welcome to look through any of it. Hopefully you'll find all the contact details you're looking for, especially of his daughter on his cell phone, because I'm sure she needs to hear about his tragic passing." "I'll do that after I've seen the body for myself. Did Mr. Reynolds, ma'am, look as if he was ill last night in any way? Sick, perhaps?" "No, absolutely not, officer. I think if he were feeling under the weather, he'd have mentioned something about it." It was my husband who interjected. "Officer, how can I put it to you? Mr. Reynolds was a quiet, reticently reserved, rather demure man. A perfect gentleman, you could say. My wife here, she's very, very good with people, always has been. She really made Mr. Reynolds feel right at home. He opened up to her last night over the dinner table. So we learnt a significant amount about him. So you say over dinner he was absolutely fine. He didn't complain of any headaches, feeling peaky, heart palpitations perhaps?" "No, nothing like that, officer. And he had quite an appetite on him, I assure you of that. I remember he had 3 roast potatoes, plenty of chicken, some cheesy grits and cornbread, and that was followed by some apple fritters, and he had second helpings of those." "Sounds to me, ma'am, that you're quite the cook," said the officer,
flashing me a warm, approving smile. "Well, I try my best, officer," I said, blushing.
"So he ate rather well. What time did he retire to bed last night, ma'am?"
"Well, he didn't, officer. That's the point. He was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, reading a Dick Francis book. He told me how much he loves the author Dick Francis. I asked him if he'd like a hot chocolate or something, and he said that would be nice. And that was when I brought him a cocoa. We spoke a little together, and then I turned in for the night, leaving him behind sitting on the couch in the living room. After that, I have no clue. Your guess is as good as mine."
"What did you speak about, ma'am, before you returned to bed that night? Do you remember? It might be of interest."
"Nothing really, officer. But he did say that on a walk in the woodgrove that afternoon, he felt as if he was being stalked. That got my attention, let me tell you." At this, the officer looked quite interested and scribbled down some more notes.
"Ma'am, when you saw his deceased corpse in the grove, it's very important. Was he wearing last night's attire on his person, or a fresh set of clothes that he possibly put on this morning? That might suggest he left the property this morning for a walk, or he could have had a walk after he spoke to you last night. That's what I'm trying to guess."
"Well, he was wearing the clothes he'd worn at dinner," I told the officer truthfully.
"Is there a possibility, ma'am, that Mr. Reynolds could have taken a walk in the woods at night after you retired to bed?"
"Well, that's what I'm saying. It's a possibility. But remember, it would have been very dark, and I saw no flashlight with the body, so I assume he might have taken a walk early this morning," I lied.
"Do you know, ma'am, if Mr. Reynolds spoke of any health issues that he might have been having, like high blood pressure or something? Do you know if he was on any medications, perhaps?"
"Well, he never mentioned anything to me. Apart from his emotional state, of course. Mr. Reynolds is a fit man, officer. He walks a great deal, apparently, and travels rather frequently to places he's been with his wife. He'd come here to Stowe regularly during the winter, when he was younger, to go skiing with his wife. He likes coming back to places that are rather nostalgic for him. I can assure you, officer, Mr. Reynolds was lean and reasonably fit. I had no reason to doubt that he was in good health."
"Thanks, ma'am. You've been remarkably helpful, very informative. You can stay here if you like, ma'am, while I go into the woods with the EMTs and the other officer, with your husband, of course, to locate the body. Once we've established he's dead, then we'll call the coroner."
I watched my husband talking with the two officers as they, along with the EMTs, all walked into the grove together. I decided I wouldn't even tell my husband about the Bigfoot I'd encountered. I wondered how the officers would react when they could not find Mr. Reynolds' deceased body. But there was no way that I was ever going to tell them what had really happened. I didn't want them to look at me as if I'd lost leave of my senses and belonged in a funny farm. When the officers came back from the woods and were sashaying down the driveway, they were talking earnestly with my husband. I knew something was up. The EMTs got back into their ambulance and drove away. The two officers were led into the house by my husband. They went upstairs to search through Mr. Reynolds' stuff, in his bedroom, bathroom, en suite, to look for his ID, I suspect.
"You won't believe it, Kimmy,"
said my husband, when he came downstairs to see me. I could see he was bursting to tell me the news.
"Kimmy, something really weird has happened."
I raised a brow, premeditatedly, of course, and said, "What do you mean, weird?"
"The body of Mr. Reynolds has vanished. It's nowhere to be seen. It's not in the grove anymore. Do you realize what I'm saying, Kim? Mr. Reynolds' body has gone. It's vanished, disappeared into thin air."
"You mean it's not there anymore?" I asked, pretending to be very surprised.
"That's exactly what I mean, Kimmy. We couldn't find the body anywhere. How can it vanish like that? The mind just boggles. The officers are going to recruit some dogs and a search team to try and find the location of the body. It can't have got terribly far. But something or someone has moved it. Can you bloody believe that, Kimmy?"
"Gone? But how can that be?" I said.
"That's what the officers are trying to establish," said my husband.
It was a long day for us at the White Owl Inn, as officers arrived on the scene, and the woodgrove on our property was thoroughly searched. but even the dogs failed to pick up the scent of Mr. Reynolds. The dead body could not be found anywhere, but it was 2 days later that my husband got a phone call from an officer concerning the investigation, who informed us on what was going on.
"Good news, Mr. Viceroy. The body of Mr. Reynolds has been recovered, I'm glad to say. It's a huge relief for all of us at the Sheriff's County Office." "It has been found?" my husband asked. "Where was it found?" "It was found about 24 hours ago. A farmer who lived a 2-hour drive away from you, to be exact. He was out in his field and noticed the body slumped against the barbed wire fence. He said it wasn't there the day prior, so someone had to have dumped it there and moved the body so far away from your woods. It's extraordinary, especially as the person who dumped the body would have had to climb over barbed wire fences. Those things can tear you to shreds, believe me, if you're not careful. We got our forensic team to look for any evidence, but we only found a few black hairs on his person that they couldn't identify as being totally human. We did an autopsy as quickly as we could, and given autopsy results can take weeks and weeks, we were very lucky indeed on that score. The coroner was very obliging to proceed with things very urgently. We needed to establish as quickly as possible that there was no foul play concerning Mr. Reynolds' untimely death, and we wanted to establish that he hadn't committed suicide. So we did a series of toxicology tests. Off the record between you and me, you'll be glad to know, Mr. Viceroy, the autopsy confirmed what you and your wife believed happened to the old man. It would seem that your guess that he had a massive coronary arrest while taking a stroll in the woodgrove is accurate. The coroner believes he died between 10 o'clock at night to about 5 this morning, so maybe he did go for a morning walk. I have to say that despite your saying that Mr. Reynolds looked as fit as a fiddle when the coroner opened him up, she was surprised he hadn't died years before. He had so much arterial plaque inside him, it isn't even true. It was one of the worst cases she'd ever seen in her entire life. It just goes to show the outside does not always reflect the inside, because by all accounts you described your guest to be a very fit, healthy man. But it would seem he was anything but. He was fit, officer. I'm surprised his body was in a bad way. I wouldn't have expected that. Why do you think the body was moved from our woods, officer, to so far away? I have no idea, Mr. Viceroy. Your guess is as good as mine. I recall your wife said that Mr. Reynolds claimed to believe someone had been stalking him on a walk in the grove. Maybe that someone saw him dropping down dead and tried to remove the body, in case their DNA was found in the woods, perhaps on a bottle or something. They were probably concerned about this. They didn't want to be falsely accused of his death. It's just a thought. You'll be surprised what people will do to protect themselves from police scrutiny, Mr. Viceroy. But the autopsy results do not lie. I will say that finding Mr. Reynolds' body so far from where you both reside is extraordinary. If I didn't know any better, I would say he had been teleported from one destination to another. It's a very strange, peculiar case. But in my line of work, nothing surprises me anymore. And I've learnt that sometimes answers to enigmatic questions will never ever be found. So what are you going to do now, officer? Asked my husband. Well, you know the usual. We're going to have to get in touch with his daughter in Ireland to tell her the tragic news. It's part of my job. I don't enjoy it, but it has to be done.
As I correctly anticipated, there was an article in the press written about the rather peculiar case. Thankfully, no attention was drawn to the White Owl Inn. I was grateful for that. The article simply stated, "An 85-year-old man by the name of Ian Reynolds from Queens, New York, was sadly found lying dead in a woodgrove close to the town of Stowe by 2 people who own an inn in the area, taking a casual morning stroll, who stumbled accidentally upon the corpse. Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy discovered the body lying on a random footpath and immediately called the police to notify them of this. But when the police arrived on the scene and went to locate the body, it had all but mysteriously disappeared. The body was found 2 days later, lying in a farmer's field.
Farmer Bryce Easterman told the Herald. I was on the field a day prior, on the back of my tractor. Had the deceased corpse been there at the time, I would have seen it at once. It would have been extremely difficult to miss. It would seem the body had been moved to Bryce Easterman's field, which is 2 hours away from Stowe, which left officers very befuddled. A coroner's report has confirmed that Mr. Reynolds died of a massive heart attack, so foul play in connection to his untimely passing has been ruled out. As to why Mr. Reynolds' body was moved in the first place in such an inexplicable way, without receiving any after-death scratches, given the large amount of barbed wire fences that ultimately would needed to have been crossed to get to Farmer Bryce's field, is nothing short of extraordinary, leaving behind more questions than answers. Some people believe the mysterious disappearance of Mr. Reynolds has got something to do with UFO activity in the area. One woman living close to the inn has claimed she's seen strange lights coming from those woods. I think Mr. Reynolds was abducted. He was taken up into a spaceship. And once they did all that, bodies, whatever they do to bodies, well, then they just discarded him, didn't they? It's not surprising he was found 2 hours away from Stowe, if you ask me. It is certain that the area is a hive of UFO anomalies. Mr. Ian Reynolds leaves behind a daughter who lives in Ireland, with her husband and 3 adult grandchildren. The daughter was naturally devastated to learn about her father's passing. Jennifer Braxton described her father as one of the most gentle souls you can ever hope to meet. She intends to fly over to America to make funeral arrangements for her father in the next couple of days. As I reflected over the article, and remembered how the Bigfoots had ferried the body of Mr. Reynolds away, only to place it in a farmer's field 2 hours away from Stowe, where it could easily be found, left me with only one swift conclusion. The Bigfoots did not want the dead body to draw attention to the woods on our property, where maybe they choose to hang out. Far from wanting to eat the body, they had simply removed it to another location. I decided this would be a secret I wouldn't ever share, not even with my husband, only because if he told me the same unlikely story, I would have a hard time believing it, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life persuading him that it had happened.
Laurie Parnell's account, 7 months later.
My wife Peggy looked up at me. Frustration was written on her face. She looked worn out, jaded and fatigued from 7 hours spent on the road, where we were travelling all the way from our home in Buffalo, New York, to Vermont. I was the one that always chose to do the long-distance driving. My wife had never been a particularly patient traveller. She loathed spending more than 2 hours in a car at a time. I was heartily relieved that we would soon be at our destination, the White Owl Inn, in approximately 15 to 20 minutes' time. It was fall. The countryside in Vermont was resplendently ablaze with the most glorious colours, as deciduous trees everywhere were lavishly dressed in their opulent autumn finery. Everything was magnanimously painted in showy displays of rich golds, reds, and splendid rusts. It was extremely beguiling. I had decided that such exquisite scenery would be very complimentary, and very appropriate as an alluring, prepossessing backdrop of the photographs that I intended to take of the White Owl Inn and her surroundings. I had assured the owners of the White Owl Inn, Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, that I would of course be back again during peak season to take some scenic photographs of the sculptural mountains dressed in carpets of glistening white snow, along with pictures of the inn itself, swaddled in its stunning winter finery, where I imagined the cosy crackling fires would bring the quintessential romantic gloss to any of my brochures. In my opinion, autumn was a quintessential perfect time of the year, so often overlooked, where I could produce some excellent snapshots of the abundant natural world, where she expressed her prepossessing beauty unabashedly. As a photographer, I employed the benefits of nature to enhance the appeal of my photographs, so they became postcard perfect. Shall we say, me and my wife Peggy had been invited to the White Owl Inn, courtesy of the Viceroys, to do a glossy cover spread for a magazine, as well as putting on some online profiles on the net in order to help the White Owl Inn galvanize that much-needed publicity, as it had only recently opened its doors to the public. The owners were eager to generate as much business as possible, so in this regard advertising was extremely crucial for them, and they were eager to do a cover spread before the winter finally rolled in. I was hopeful as a result of my footage of the inn, the couple would receive lots of bookings from interested parties, looking for the perfect alpine retreat or escape, if you like, where they could thoroughly enjoy a spot of skiing, and cosy winter evenings spent luxuriating by romantic log fires, and in true traditional style, telling their loved ones ghost stories. Ostensibly, people loved to flock to the little town of Stowe, with its eclectic vintage shops and old-world charm, and who could blame them for that? Me and my wife Peggy rarely loved this part of the world very much. We could easily understand why it was popular as a winter retreat for so many people, drawing so many to the small town from all parts of the world. The last time I'd been to Stowe, my wife Peggy had gone into one of those eclectic-looking shops, which sold absolutely everything connected to the dairy cow. Would you actually believe that? You could believe anything in Stowe. I hasten to say when we returned home from our little alpine adventure, she had pretty much brought the entire shop back home with her. She indulged herself with all manner of things, like placemats covered in cows, cow pepper and salt cellars, cow cookie barrels, a cow jug and a set of cow mugs, and even a teapot that was shaped into a cow. Those are the kind of trinket-type shops you can invariably find in a place like Stowe. My wife, of course, was oohing and aahing, as the fairer of the sexes so often does, over everything in the shop, saying, "Oh, Laurie, aren't these cow egg holders just so adorable?" She would look up at me with bright, shiny eyes that were as bright as the stars in the sky, as she examined all these cow accessories, with an expression of wondrous awe on her face. "Oh, this is too cute! Look, Laurie, at the cow's face on the cookie barrel! I mean, have you ever? Now, I would like this to store the chocolate chip cookies I bake. Don't you think it would be absolutely perfect in our kitchen?" I would nod at her, very bored I would be, wondering how she could be so bewitched by all these ridiculously over-the-top knickknacks. But that was Peggy for you, and was probably one of the incongruous reasons I loved this incorrigible woman so very much. Let's just say when Peggy starts shopping in any shop like this, it would seem there is no end in sight. A lot of men would know what I mean by this. Let's just say when Peggy starts shopping in a quirky shop like this, it would seem for her there is no end in sight. She has a remarkable uncanny penchant for picking up pretty useless things. Let's just say the more impractical, the more purposeless and over the top, the better, as far as Peggy is concerned. Regretfully, I have to confess, as a consequence of visiting so many shops like this over the years, during our travels, we have collected many of these dust collectors at home. Peggy, you see, can never settle with just one souvenir, so it's so much easier to leave with a dozen of them, so she doesn't have the grave misfortune of having to choose what item to buy. She would always look at me with a woe-begotten forlorn face, as if her life had come to a tumultuous end, and say, "Oh, I don't know what to do, Laurie. I don't know which one of these ornaments to take home with me. They're all irresistibly cute. I love them all. I mean, look at the salt and pepper sellers. Look at the cookie barrel and the teapot. And the mugs. I mean, what should I do? How can I possibly be expected to choose between these things?" Then would come the very over-exaggerated, excruciating, disquieted expression on her face, as if choosing what to buy in the shop was actually causing her physical distress. I would be the one that wanted to escape the lunacy of the shop. So I would say, I tell you what, why don't you just take them all and be done with it, so you don't have to choose? Of course, my wife Peggy was expecting me to say this. Her face would naturally brighten. She'd burst into a happy smile, and she would say, "Of course I should take them all. How silly of me not to think of that before. Oh, Laurie, you are so clever. Why didn't I think of that? I will be relieved to take them all. Now I don't have to choose." I would be very relieved we were finally leaving the store, so my wife's excessive expense on useless items was the very least of my concerns. Even though this part of the world is fabulously good for skiing in winter, as far as I was concerned, I would never want to go skiing again, if I could possibly help it. In my humble opinion, winter sports are overrated, and many of the rich and well-to-do believe a skiing holiday is hip. It's the trendy thing to do. But honestly, I don't agree with that at all. There are lots of things people can do that are cheaper and infinitely more fun than going skiing. And my recent holidays spent with Peggy are testament to that. Apart from anything else, I had completely lost my nerve as far as snow sports are concerned, and you could hardly blame me for that. I'd had a devastating ski accident. It happened to me in Switzerland 5 years earlier, where I was contracted by an American couple from Michigan to take photographs of their holiday resorts in the Swiss Alps for a glossy brochure. I'm not exactly sure what happened to me on that morning that I went skiing with my wife. My memory is a little bleary, I hasten to say. I do remember losing my balance rather precariously when skiing down a treacherous mountain slope that was designed for more advanced skiers. Why had I insisted on tackling that slope? God only knows. I was delusional, I think, fancying myself as a better skier than I actually was. Even my instructor wisely advised me against tackling the slope. But would I listen? Absolutely not. It would seem my mulishly stubborn streak did me no favours. I ended up being flung into a tree very hard, and almost died on impact. I was rushed to the hospital by EMTs that arrived on the scene almost at once. But during my near-death experience, I was left floating above my body until the EMTs began working on me hard, and I can still recall the resigned expressions on their faces. They rarely believed I was a goner. I remember coming back into my body with a huge jolt, and I was angry with those EMTs for reviving me. It all happened so quickly, but when I'd slipped out of my body, I became as free as a bird. I felt as light as a feather, and joyfully full, like a seed floating on the wind. It was a euphoric, dreamy feeling, the likes of such I have never experienced before or since. It has completely expunged any fear of death, as I know now that after my profound, indelible experience, that our spirit lives on after death, and we are so much more than just our bodies that seem to just contain us like a vessel. I do distinctly recall hearing a booming, powerful voice telling me, "It's not your time. You need to go back, son." I looked down at my body very indifferently, and when I realized it was me lying under the tree, in a pathetic crumpled heap, I remember thinking, I certainly didn't want to get back in that loathsome, cumbersome-looking body of mine. It was dreadfully unappealing. I felt no attachment towards my physical body. It did not define me. The real me, or my essence, if you like, was floating above my body. I didn't go down a tunnel with a light at the end that near-death experiences so often speak about. I was so busily preoccupied watching the EMTs working on me. It was rather fascinating to watch. I remember wondering why they were even bothering to revive me at all. I'm not dead, I thought. I'm more alive than I have ever been. I wanted to tap one of the EMTs on the shoulder, tell him to stop trying to revive me. But even when I spoke to him, he failed to hear me. It was extremely frustrating. It was a moment later that I was flung rudely back into my body. I couldn't even argue with the man that had told me to return to it. I had no choice in the matter. There was no negotiation. I never told anyone what had happened to me for a long time, but my wife Peggy did comment that I didn't seem to be terribly grateful to have my life spared, and had become unreasonably grumpy and very rude to the nursing staff at the hospital, which was something I deeply regret. I guess I was just indignantly angry to have been brought back like this. The best way I can describe it is, imagine you get onto an ocean cruise liner. You're going to spend several weeks away in an exotic location, and then maybe you are drawn away from your cruise because your annoying, pedantic, small-minded boss needs to see you about an important matter that he believes simply can't wait. Can you imagine how mad you would be about losing out on this fabulous holiday destination? You wouldn't be particularly enamored with your boss either, would you? You'd feel that you had really missed out on an exciting adventure, thanks to your boss putting a spanner in the works and spoiling everything. That was how it felt coming back into my own body. It certainly didn't help that I was in agonizing pain as well, with a fractured pelvis, a broken leg, collapsed lung, and so many other injuries besides, too many to count, but half of them I've conveniently forgotten all about. To put it bluntly, I was very smashed up, and the Swiss doctors that fixed me had a task putting me back together again, let me tell you. While I was spending time in hospital recuperating from my injuries, some rather idiosyncratic experiences happened to me. I do recall one of the nurses in attendance of me walked into my private hospital ward. I abruptly asked her if her mother had recently died. She looked up at me incredulously and said, "How could you possibly know that?" "As it happens, yes, she did die recently. Why do you ask that?" I continued, "Your mother has had epileptic seizures for all of her life, has she not? She had a nasty seizure, took a tumble down a staircase. You found her, didn't you? It really upset you." The nurse's eyes widened. "Who are you?" she asked me, her face paling. "How can you know all this? You're creeping me out. Who are you that you can know such personal things about me?" "I don't know how I know all this," I replied. "But when I died on the ski slope for a couple of minutes or so, I came back knowing things about people that I can't possibly know. Don't ask me how this has happened."
That is very surprising. If I may give you a word of advice, it might be a good idea if you don't speak of such things to people. You gave me quite the shock talking about my mother like that. But other people might not take this too well, you know.
Let me tell you, that was salient advice on the nurse's part that has served me well. So I've tried my level best to hold back my unbridled tongue, when for no reason at all I might know things about people that I cannot explain, and am tempted to say something. Unfortunately, there have been times that my tongue has run away with me, rather like a cheeky, misbehaving schoolboy. Then I say things that invariably ruffle up people's feathers, and furthermore grievously upset my wife Peggy. Ostensibly, Peggy found some of my outbursts very inappropriate, and she was probably right about that. "What the hell is wrong with you, Laurie?" she would say to me on numerous occasions. "Why did you say that to the poor little old dear? I'm so embarrassed by you. There are no words, Laurie, no words. Does that poor woman want to be reminded of a day she almost died? Especially when she's happily shopping in Walmart, putting tins of tuna in her shopping cart. And then there you go waltzing up to her and start telling her all these things about her life. Goodness gracious, I was so dreadfully embarrassed. I wanted the ground to swallow me up whole. The old dear couldn't get away from you fast enough, and as a consequence nearly collided into another shopping cart on her escape. What are you like, Laurie?" I couldn't help it. I was having flashbacks in regards to her life. "Yes, you could help it, Laurie. You didn't have to say anything at all. You can see those flashbacks in your mind and just ignore them. Why can't you be like anybody else? Why do you have to pay attention to those flashbacks? Little did my poor wife Peggy know, things were going to get significantly worse for her when we arrived at our destination, the White Owl Inn, to meet Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy. For it would seem my tongue would want to come out again to play, rather like a mischievous toddler escaping the confines of his playpen. And I was not going to hold back on the words that would roll off my tongue so seamlessly. I realized my near-death experience after my unfortunate skiing accident in Switzerland had given me some extraordinary extrasensory abilities that I did not welcome gladly. It was more of a curse than a blessing. This heightened sensitivity of mine had made me sometimes very aware of what other people were thinking or feeling. I remember once when my wife invited a friend for dinner, I could hear her friend, a woman called Cynthia Granger. I could hear every thought that was going on in her head. She was thinking, how long did she have to sit at our dinner table, pretending to enjoy herself? I've got such a thumping headache, she was thinking. I really want to leave now. But Laurie and Peggy are so desperately nice. They've gone to so much trouble on my account. I'm just going to have to grin and bear it, and pretend to be enjoying myself and having a good time. But boy, I wish I could get back home. This migraine headache of mine is killing me. My head is absolutely throbbing. When you hear thoughts like that over a dinner table, it can make the experience exceedingly uncomfortable for you, especially when you realize your guest doesn't wish to be present with you and is clearly not enjoying themselves, and besides anything else, has a thumping migraine headache. And believe me, I know all about those, being a migraine sufferer myself. I remember I walked over to my wife's friend with a couple of headache tablets that I knew were extremely effective, for I took them for my own migraines that had become significantly worse after my skiing accident in Switzerland. I handed her the pills and a glass of water. "What is this for?" she asked, looking at me in surprise. "For your headache, of course, Cynthia. You've got a thumping migraine, haven't you? These tablets are excellent. It'll take your migraine away." Cynthia's eyes naturally grew round with surprise. She looked at me rather strangely, like the nurse at the Swiss hospital had done. She thankfully took the tablets from me, popping them into her mouth. I know she was thinking, how could Laurie know that I have a headache? I never mentioned it to them, did I? I'm very glad the pill did the trick for Cynthia, as by the end of the evening she didn't want to leave. She had enjoyed our company so much. But being able to hear people's thoughts is not always a reassuring experience, I can assure you. Let's just say before my skiing accident, I had probably been extremely cynical about people claiming to have extrasensory abilities. But after my accident, I would know things I shouldn't know about people, or would pick up feelings and emotions. It was disquieting knowing things I shouldn't know. In truth, it made me feel like a peeping Tom, looking into someone's personal business, even if I didn't want to. On the way to the White Owl Inn, I had a profound sense that something rather idiosyncratic was going to happen there during our stay. I had a feeling the Viceroys were sitting on a secret, that they had kept cloak and dagger for fear of any publicity concerning this matter that might jeopardize the success of their business. Where this information was coming from, I did not know. I could only wonder what the couple were hiding. They seemed nice enough folk to me on my video chats with them. I remember fighting the awe-consuming feeling away, as I always did when these knowings would take hold of me, trespassing into my mind like unwanted house guests that were not at all welcome. The last thing I wanted to do was to upset my wife Peggy again by saying something extremely inappropriate. I was determined that on this little business trip of ours, I would hold my tongue. I thoroughly enjoyed my job as a professional freelance photographer, doing cover shots for hotels, restaurants, and venues alike. I hoped that me and my wife Peggy and our stay at the White Owl Inn would be a pleasurable experience for the both of us.
We worked together as an efficient professional team. And my wife, like myself, was an outstanding photographer. Since we had married all those years ago, we had decided to make a profession out of our passion, and it had served us both very well. I had never been the conformist type, so for me engaging in a 9-to-5 job would have left me tearing my hair out in frustration and would have literally beaten the life out of me. Thankfully for me and my wife, I'm glad to say that our hard work and dedication to our business paid off exponentially. But in the very beginning, when we first started our business, we had been living on baked beans for months on end. But we persevered over the rocky, rather tumultuous challenges along our way, and in the end our patience paid off. But it was a long, rather precarious road. Our photography had taken us all over North America, and even around the globe. We loved every minute of pursuing our dreams, and had promptly decided we would put off having any children for a while. But now Peggy was reminding me, almost every single day, that she was 36 years old, and her biological clock was beginning to tick very loudly. Peggy looked good for her age. I couldn't fault her appearance. She could have easily been in her late 20s rather than middle 30s, with her fresh, dewy complexion and her big brown spirited eyes that looked as innocent as that of a doe. I, on the other hand, looked infinitely more frayed, worn out and weathered. Time had been less favourable to me. It would seem after the skiing accident I had lost all my hair, probably from the physical shock of the experience. But Peggy kindly told me that my shiny bald head suited me. I'm not sure I agreed, as when you looked at my face, my dark eyebrows looked so much more prominent now, as if I was wearing 2 great big black caterpillars above my blue eyes. But Maggie once again assured me very tactfully that she rather liked my caterpillars. She even gave them pet names. Much like Peggy, I wanted to have a couple of children myself, and would also like to have a couple of dogs running around our home. So I knew in due course our lives would invariably change. I would have to go solo with the photography, while Peggy became a stay-at-home mum full-time. So I wanted to make the most of the time we had together, working as a team. When we both arrived at the White Owl Inn, we were cordially, warmly welcomed by both Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, whom I liked immediately. They were a wholesome, genuinely friendly couple, and were eager to get their business off the ground. I have to say they'd absolutely transformed the inn into a very romantic alpine retreat. When Peggy saw the inn for the first time, she said, "Oh, goodness gracious me! This place is so enchanting, so dreamy. Oh, I'm going to love staying here. Taking pictures of this place. Oh, the views, Laurie. They are spectacular, are they not?" "They sure are idyllic," I agreed. My wife turned for a brief moment to look at me, from the passenger side seat where she was seated. Her eyes fixed on me with a rather formidable look, and I could predict what was going to happen next. I could even envisage the very words she was about to utter. "Now, I don't want you making any outrageous statements to the Viceroys. Do you understand, Laurie?" she said, looking at me accusingly. "I don't care what psychic impressions you get of this place or of the Viceroys themselves. If you get any of them, for God's sake, will you shut them down? I don't want you embarrassing me again. I couldn't bear it if you did that. I want us to have an enjoyable time here, Laurie. The last thing I need is for you to become like a cat among the pigeons. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "But of course, my sweet cherub. Would I ever do anything to upset you? You know me." "Oh, of course I know you, Laurie. That's the problem. I know you too well. You're as predictable as the weather. Now, don't you dare act innocent, Laurie. You know very well you've ruffled people's feathers more times than I care to remember since that accident of yours in Switzerland. It's the people we meet that may be on the receiving end of some of the things you just randomly blurt out without applying any thought. If you can read their minds or see something, for goodness sake, keep those thoughts to yourself. No one wants to know what you're thinking, least of all me.
Especially not me. Oh, don't be like that, sweet cherub. I'm not that bad. You make me sound like an impossible dog that can't be controlled. But you are like an impossible dog, Laurie, that can't be controlled. That's the problem. I may remind you, in case you've conveniently forgotten, our job is to dazzle the Viceroys with our breathtakingly beautiful photographs and put their little inn on the map for them. Nothing more and nothing less. They're paying us generously, and I don't need you spoiling things for us by blurting out something random and inappropriate, like you did last time with the Madisons. When you told poor Mrs. Madison about the baby son that everybody had forgotten about, that died in a cot death years before, I couldn't believe you could be so blazingly insensitive towards the women. But you couldn't keep your zip shut, could you, Laurie? Poor Mrs. Madison. She didn't need to be reminded of such a traumatic time in her life. But no, you come along like a great big bull in a china shop and tear the band-aid off her. So the wound of her grief is open again, left to bleed. You really upset her, even though she was polite about it, but I could see the grief in her eyes all too clearly. And what about that poor dear at Walmart, when you practically accosted the perfect stranger, blurting out to her about a near-death experience she must have had? You can't behave like that, Laurie. I'm sorry, but it's not normal behaviour. Ever since that skiing accident of yours, you've become as wild and untamed as a stallion that has been broken in and needs to learn to behave itself. I made a mock salute at my wife, and cheekily said, "Aye, aye, sir. I promise you I'll be on my best behaviour today, Peggy. Are you happy now?" My wife rolled her eyes in the back of her head, as if she found me absolutely exasperating. I'm sure she did. She said, "Well, I'll have to see it to believe it, Laurie." I knew if people online were to log into my glossy photographs that I intended to take of the White Owl Inn, that the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, would get bookings rolling in left, right and centre. I was reasonably confident about the high quality of my work. The Viceroys were a warm, welcoming couple, a nicer people you could not hope to meet. I was impressed by how stunning the renovations to the inn had been, because the couple had successfully maintained the integrity of the former building, which had been rescued, I understand, from a state of very bad repair. It does rather upset me when houses of history are allowed to seep into a rancid decay. Beyond that, the furnishings were unique and invited a sumptuously cosy atmosphere. I could imagine coming back to the inn after a day spent skiing out on the slopes and relaxing by a warm, crackling fire, while drinking back copious mugs of delicious hot chocolate. It is the kind of enchanting little inn from which sweet dreams from nostalgic, wistful memories can easily be made. "So what do you think of the inn?" Mrs. Viceroy asked me, eager to get my opinion on the place. The woman was looking at me inquiringly.
"Do you think people will like coming here? We've had a few guests already staying here since the spring. But it is nice getting a professional photographer's perspective on the place. I can see you have an artistic eye, Mr. Margareton. Do you think me and my husband have created the right ambience for the inn? I'm quite happy for you to give me an honest opinion, and I want it to be unbiased. I really like constructive feedback because it means I can make improvements on the place if need be."
"Mrs. Viceroy, I am a very honest, straightforward man, and I can tell you honestly, you and your husband should be very proud of your accomplishments. You've excelled yourself. I've seen lots of inns over the years. Yours is up with the very best of them. The inn is spectacular, the views over the mountains idyllic. I imagine any guest coming to stay here is going to be absolutely delighted. Don't you agree, Peggy?" I said, turning to my wife for confirmation of my thoughts.
"I agree with my husband. This place is absolutely dreaming. So enchanting. Who wouldn't want to stay here? And I love the name the White Owl Inn. It really suits the place. It's like out of a fairy tale, is it not?" "Oh, I'm so pleased to hear you say that,"
said Mrs. Viceroy, looking genuinely delighted, her face flushing pink with excitement.
"You see, I've dreamed of owning an inn like this for years and years. And now that it's happened to us, Well, it's surreal for the both of us. Sometimes I have to pinch myself, she giggled, and remind myself this place really is ours.
Don't you worry, Mrs. Viceroy. Leave everything to us, I reassured her. We will get your charming inn on the map for you. We've had much success over the years, me and my wife. We will get some stunning photography done for the both of you that will attract lots of eager holiday makers to stay at your inn from all around the world. Mrs. Viceroy looked absolutely delighted. She waved a hand in front of her face, as if fanning herself. It was almost as if my pleasing words had suddenly made her terribly hot, and she needed to cool down.
I know you will, Mr. Margaretta, she said resolutely, because I've seen your work. It's stunning. If anyone can put us on the map, it's you and your wife.
You don't need to call me by my surname, Mrs. Viceroy. I'm Laurie, and my wife over here is Peggy. We never stand on ceremony.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. You can call me Kim.
The Viceroys took me around the inn, and my wife appropriately oohed and ahed over the fabulous setting, and how much we were eagerly looking forward to taking photographs for the glossy magazine spread. It was when I entered the living room my demeanour changed almost at once. My attention was drawn to the couch, and I got flashbacks in my head of a man sitting on the couch. But the man was not alive. He was deceased. Then I had very disturbing flashing images of the Viceroys themselves trying to move the body, on a blue plastic tarpaulin of all things. The shocking imagery was so clearly visible that I was in no doubt that these flashbacks were true, and what was being played to me in my head was real. It was such disturbing imagery that I was suddenly feeling violently sick, but managed to maintain a cool composure. I wondered why the Viceroys had dragged a deceased body through their living room, out of the inn and into the woods. I saw that imagery too clearly. I knew exactly what had happened. I could see flashbacks of Kim, her face all pale and worried looking. And then I heard her saying, "We have to do this. We haven't got a choice." Did the couple have something nefarious to hide, I wondered. I kept getting the name Ian in my head. Was that the name of the man that had tragically died? I wondered, but the big question was, how had he died, and why had he died? Did the Viceroys have something to do with his untimely passing? I mean, why hide a dead body, if you're completely innocent? I noticed that Kim Viceroy's face had significantly paled when she saw me staring at the couch.
"Is everything all right, Laurie?" she asked me. "You look as if you've seen a ghost."
"Someone died here, didn't they? On that couch over there," I said rather abruptly, before I had time to guard my very disobedient tongue, that had decided to waggle a little, against my will. "I think his name was Ian. He was an elderly man. I get strange, rather peculiar images in my head, Mrs. Viceroy, of you and your husband moving the deceased corpse, dragging it all the way to the woods. I see a blue plastic tarpaulin was used. Why do I get such disquieting images in my head like this?" I asked her inquiringly, as if I'd just thrown an explosive hand grenade at her. What on earth was wrong with me? Why was I challenging this poor woman, as if accusing her of a duplicitous crime she didn't seem capable of committing? Much like my wife Peggy, Kim Viceroy looked as innocent as a brand new morning. My tongue was getting way too out of control, and I could feel Peggy's indignant eyes burning into me. At that moment, Kim Viceroy's eyes widened. Her face became as pink as a peony. I noticed her husband standing next to her, put his arms protectively around her back, as if he was trying to hold her up, in case she keeled over. Kim looked as if she was about to pass out from the shock of my words, as if I'd just thrown a hand grenade at her. My wife Peggy was poking me furiously in the ribs and giving me an angry glare, as if to say, "Why the hell would you say a thing like that? I thought I warned you, Laurie, about that unbridled tongue of yours. Do you want to have this contract or not? What on earth is wrong with you? Why would you say such crazy, nonsensical, very inappropriate things? Anyone can see the Viceroys are a very amenable couple. Why would you go stirring up trouble like this? Are you completely deranged, off your rocker perhaps? Those are the words my wife spoke to me in my mind, without even uttering a verbal word. But I heard those words as clear as day, as if they had actually been spoken. My wife managed a watery, half-hearted, apologetic smile at both of the Viceroys. You must excuse my husband. I don't know what on earth Laurie is talking about. He doesn't half go on. I'm afraid he's inclined to spout nonsense half the time. I'm sure if anyone ever did die in this living room, it probably happened an awfully long time ago, before the two of you even bought this place. Maybe my husband's picking up on an energy of a bygone time and a very lost soul. He's never been the same since he had a skiing accident in Switzerland a couple of years back. Since then, he's impossible to control. He sometimes just blurts out very inappropriate things that don't make any sense at all. He claims to get flashbacks on the past, events that play out in his mind rather like a movie. You can imagine he's ruffled a few feathers along the way. But take absolutely no notice of him. He has no idea what he's talking about. At this point, my wife turned around to me and cast me a warning glare that was so indignant that if looks could kill, I would have died there and then on the spot. Believe me when I say my wife can fire off a range of looks that would have the army diving for cover. I ignored my wife's furious glares and said, "But I do know someone died here. I know they did. Their energy is still strong in this room, and it was a recent death. They died on that couch over there. And why do I get images of you and your husband, Kim, moving the body out of this house, taking it into the woods? What are the two of you hiding?" "Oh, for goodness sake, Laurie, what on earth is your problem?" said my wife, snapping at me. "I've had enough of these rude outbursts of yours. Honestly, listen to yourself. You're practically accusing poor Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy of harming someone. Are you completely out of your mind, love? You can't just go accusing people of stuff like that. This is inappropriate behaviour of yours, and it's got to stop. I've had about as much as I can take, Laurie. I think you need to see a counsellor. You absolutely have no filter. You never used to be like this until that damn skiing accident. I rue the day you ever tackled that ridiculously high slope in Switzerland, which I warned you not to do. But as usual, you would not listen to me, or the salient advice of your ski instructor, who firmly told you in no uncertain terms that you were not good enough to ski down that slope. But no, you stubbornly refused to listen, which is always the story of your life. Then you go colliding into a tree, and almost ended up killing yourself in the process. If you want to talk about psychic abilities, I have them too, you know, Laurie. I never told you this before, but I had a very funny, strange feeling that you'd injure yourself on that mountain slope. Turns out I wasn't wrong. Now let's not kid, that accident in Switzerland did something very weird to your brain. You've never been the same after it. And some of the nonsense you keep spouting is downright embarrassing. At this, Kim burst into tears. Her husband began to console her, while my wife Peggy looked at me as if she would simply like to murder me, or skin me alive, perhaps, with a look that said, "Now look what you've gone and done. This is so typical of you, Laurie. I can't take you anywhere without you rudely disturbing the peace and causing mayhem." I suppose I couldn't blame her for that. Certainly after my skiing accident, I had changed exponentially, and sometimes I didn't seem to have a filter, and would just say things without really thinking about what I was saying. I had excelled myself in causing great upset. The last thing I wanted to do was to make a perfect stranger cry like this. It was not a good feeling. What the hell was wrong with me? Why couldn't I control myself and the words in my mouth that seemed to leak out of me like a dripping tap that you simply can't fix? Peggy was right about me. I would just blurt things out at random. It was driving her completely mad. Despite the fact she loved me, her patience was wearing extremely thin. I was also beginning to lose patience with myself, as I seemed unable to break free from my thoughts, what you've gone and done, Laurie," my wife interjected. "Look how you've upset poor Kim. You've reduced her to tears. I hope you're proud of yourself. Sometimes I'm ashamed to call you my husband." Hearing Peggy say that stung me hard, but I guess I deserved her angry retort. "I am so dreadfully sorry, Kim. I must apologize for my husband," she said, looking at Mrs. Vickeroy apologetically. "Please take no notice of him. He can be very uncouth at times, but you aren't the first to be on the receiving end of his very untamed tongue, and I doubt you will be the last." My wife turned around to me abruptly, and with her fingers she pinched me so hard in the back, I almost winced. "Are you going to apologize to Kim, Laurie, for upsetting her? Or am I going to have to get back into our car and drive straight back to Buffalo on my own? I have had as much as I can take of these uncongenial, misguided outbursts of yours, and they've got to stop." "I'm very sorry, Kim. I must apologize. My wife is absolutely right. I spoke out of turn. Honestly, I don't know what came over me back then. You see, after my skiing accident in Switzerland, I tend to sometimes get glimpses of things that might have happened in a place. But I'm sure my timing is all screwed up. I really didn't mean to upset you. You and your husband are very nice people. I tell you what, why don't you show me the kitchen where you make all the delicious meals for your guests you were telling me about? I'd like that very much indeed. Please ignore everything I formerly said. It's probably nothing. My mind is all over the place. I can't seem to establish fact from fiction," I said, giving a mock laugh. "Peggy is right, of course. What I saw in my mind's eye probably happened a long time ago, long before you even acquired the property. I didn't mean to falsely accuse you of anything you obviously didn't do. I'm very, very sorry."
Your flashbacks aren't wrong. Besides, you said you saw me and my husband dragging out a plastic tarpaulin," said Kim, shaking her head, while tears spilled down her cheeks, which she wiped away with her fingers. "Don't say anything, love," said her husband, squeezing her hand tightly, trying to anchor her to the spot like a loose tree that was coming unhinged from its roots. But Kim willfully ignored her husband's persuasions and said very matter-of-factly, "You're absolutely right, Laurie. The images that you've been getting in your head, well, they don't deceive you. Someone did actually die on that couch over there, quite recently, actually. He was such a terribly nice old man. His name was Ian Reynolds. He was staying at the White Owl Inn. He loved coming to Stowe, as it was his late wife's Molly's favourite town. We only just opened our doors of the White Owl Inn. He was our 13th guest that we had staying here, would you believe? I've never met anyone quite so melancholic in my entire life. Like poor Ian Reynolds was. I'll never ever forget him. He has a big place in my heart, you know. I felt desperately sorry for the poor man. Tragically, his wife Molly had died of breast cancer 5 years prior. I don't think poor Mr. Reynolds ever got over her passing. And then his daughter Jennifer, who's in her 50s, lives in Ireland. So his whole family was far away from him and couldn't offer him much comfort or solace. I think he felt dreadfully alone in the world. One morning while he was staying with us, I came downstairs into the living room, only to find Mr. Reynolds was sitting on the sofa, but he didn't appear to be breathing. I realised he'd died during the night. It was so desperately sad. "Sweetheart," said Mr. Vickeroy, "you don't have to say anything else to Laurie if you don't want to. What happened to Ian Reynolds is none of his business." Mr. Vickeroy then turned to me, with a rather fearsome look on his face. "Don't upset my wife, Laurie, any further. She's been through enough already. What happened to Ian Reynolds was not her fault in any way, shape or form. I want you to appreciate that. The man died of a massive heart attack, and that has been confirmed by the coroner in the autopsy report. So no, we did not have anything to do with his death. We are good people, Laurie, and we wouldn't hurt a soul." "I want to tell Laurie what happened," Kim insisted. "So my husband was right then?" asked Peggy incredulously.
And a man called Ian Reynolds did actually die on the couch over there." She shivered as she looked at the couch, as if the very idea that someone had passed away there rather recently had given her the chills.
"Yes, he did," said Kim. "As I was saying, I came downstairs that morning to find Mr. Reynolds sitting on the couch. The room was immersed in darkness because the curtains were drawn. I went over to draw them back and began to chat to him garrulously. I asked him what he wanted for breakfast. You know, that sort of thing, when you try to make cheery conversation with someone. I thought Mr. Reynolds had drifted off to sleep. But when he failed to answer me, I began to panic a little, so I started to shake him, but he failed to respond. I discovered he was deceased, and let me tell you, I freaked out. You can't imagine what it was like to find someone lying dead on your couch."
My wife cupped her hands over her mouth in horror, her eyes widening. "You poor thing, Kim. You've just got the White Owl in opened, haven't you? And then you find Mr. Reynolds lying dead in the living room. That must have been a dreadful nightmare for the both of you. I can't imagine."
"That's exactly what happened. I'm not proud of myself, but I really panicked, and when I say panicked, I was practically having kittens. I probably overreacted, but panic can do that to you, can't it? You don't always think straight when you're a little unhinged. I was so scared of any negative publicity towards our inn. I surmised that if this unfortunate news were to get out, it might negatively affect our business. I think people can get a little funny if they learn someone has recently died at a place. I persuaded my husband to move Mr. Reynolds' body. It's funny that you should describe a blue plastic tarpaulin being used to move the body of Mr. Reynolds, Laurie, because that's exactly what we used to shift his body. We carried him through the house on it, placing him on the back of a 4-seater ATV. Thank God he wasn't a heavy man, because it was an absolute nightmare shifting his dead weight. We moved his body into the woods, so the police would believe that he had collapsed and died after a morning walk. I knew if he was found out of doors, then it wouldn't impact our business so much."
Kim began to tell us the rest of this rather extraordinary unorthodox story, how the body of Mr. Reynolds had mysteriously vanished, and how it was later recovered in a farmer's field 2 hours away. That was part of the story that I found hard to swallow. But after reading the newspaper report that Kim presented to me, I realized the story was indeed true, and I could only marvel that someone had moved the body over barbed wire fencing 2 hours away from Stowe, where it was found paradoxically in a farmer's field, miles and miles away. Now how the hell does that happen? It left me with more questions than answers. But I knew Kim and her husband were innocent in regards to Mr. Reynolds' death. But moving the body in the way they had done was indeed pretty weird. So let's get this right, shall we? You moved Mr. Reynolds' body to the woodgrove on the back of your ATV. You left him lying on a bed of leaves under a tree. You then went back to the inn to call the police, and you took them to the body, only to discover it had vanished. That's incredibly bizarre. Goodness gracious me. I was unable to disguise my obvious confoundment in regards to the matter.
"I can't answer the questions for you," said Kim. "It even befuddled the police."
For a second, Kim looked nervously from me to my wife.
"You're not going to report what we did to the police, are you?"
"What is there to report?" I said. "You moved a deceased body. Big deal. Dead bodies are forever being moved, are they not, during transportation? I get why you did what you did. Me and my wife Peggy make a living with our photography, and you do what you need to do to put food on the table, as long as it's not hurting anyone, of course."
"You do understand, then?"
asked Kim, looking grateful. "But of course I understand. The living need to focus on being able to provide for their families, don't they? And if a deceased corpse has the potential to jeopardize the success of a business, then moving it to a different location makes perfect sense to me. I mean, the man died of natural causes. The coroner was able to discern that from the autopsy report. And yes, it was sad, but it is what it is. By the sounds of things, Mr. Reynolds had a very good life. Nothing to complain about, it would seem.
But do you think if people knew Mr. Reynolds died on that couch over there, which we recently got recovered with a different fabric, that it might put them off staying here at the White Owl Inn?
Kim asked me earnestly.
You must think what I did was really macabre. But I have invested all my dreams in this place. I was really scared that the death of Mr. Reynolds would ruin things for us. What you both must think of us, I can't imagine. To be fair, my husband, well, he wanted no part of this. But I insisted we did this.
Kim's husband came to his wife's immediate defence. Sweetheart, none of this was your fault. I was the one that agreed to help you move the body, didn't I? I thought you might be right, and this could jeopardise our business.
Yes, but you didn't want to do it, did you?
Said Kim defiantly.
It was all on me. That's what I'm saying.
People can be very funny, Kim, I said. We're all different, are we not? But someone dying in your living room, when you've just opened the White Owl Inn, couldn't be a very auspicious start for anyone. People by nature can be exceedingly superstitious, so I guess moving the body of Mr. Reynolds makes perfect sense. Maybe in your circumstances I might have done the very same thing. You never know how you're going to react in a situation until you become embroiled in it yourself. Sometimes we can surprise ourselves by the way we react.
Of course what the Viceroys did makes perfect sense. I completely understand it,
said my wife Peggy.
You don't want your guests to know about things like this, because it could be quite distressing for them if they were to know about it. It could certainly put them off staying in such an idyllic inn like this. Rub the shine off it a little, if you know what I mean. I tell you what, why don't we stop talking about such a morbid subject and get on with the job at hand? We want to focus on this photographic project we have ahead of us. The trees look spectacular out of doors, also golden in fall. We need to get some shots of them in our photographs for that glossy spread we're going to do.
My wife cheerfully changed the subject. Nothing further was discussed about Mr. Ian Reynolds and his unfortunate passing. It was almost as if the subject had never been discussed at all, rather like a hole in the road that gets repaired, and you no longer remember even existed. Later that evening, after a delicious home-cooked meal with the Viceroys, when we returned to our stunning bedroom suite, my wife Peggy laid into me hard. If she could have hung, drawn and quartered me on the spot, she probably would have done so, without even batting an eyelash. I guess I deserved what was coming to me.
I'm very disappointed in you, Laurie. Really I am. Why do you always put me in this awkward position, where instead of feeling like your wife, I feel like a formidable headmistress correcting bad behaviour from a kid playing truant? You make me feel as if I'm a dragon at times. But can I help it when you put me through the loop yet again? Well done. You succeeded in really upsetting Kim Viceroy today. I don't think her husband was remotely impressed with you. And can you blame him for that? He seriously looked like he wanted to clobber you. But unlike you, he was able to compose himself, keep his emotions in check, and guard his tongue.
He wasn't impressed, I agreed.
Of course he wasn't impressed. The Viceroys, I will remind you, Laurie, have hired us to do a job for them. This is our business. And if they didn't happen to be such amenable people, they could have easily kicked us to the curb, told us we were no longer welcome at their inn, that we were as nutty as fruitcakes and they didn't know what we were talking about. And they would have been in their rights to do so. Kim didn't have to admit to anything to us about the death of Mr. Reynolds. But bless her cotton sock, she broke down and told us everything.
But I was right, wasn't I, Peggy? Everything I saw in my visions was correct.
Look at you. You're so pleased you're right, aren't you? You are embarrassing. Do you know that, Laurie? Completely embarrassing. I don't care what visions you were having or how accurate they actually were. I don't give a damn about any of that. The long shot of it all, Laurie, is you shouldn't have said a single word about anything. But when push comes to shove, as usual, you can't keep that trap of yours shut. What are you trying to prove, Laurie?
It's like you want to say, I know what you did. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. I just wanted an explanation for the visions I was seeing in my head. They seemed like nice, agreeable people, the Viceroys, and I wanted to make sense of these images I was seeing. Don't you get it, Laurie? It's absolutely none of your business. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, will you? It's none of your business. Read my lips. None of your business. Don't be like that, love. Don't be like what, Laurie? I'm entitled to be angry with you. I felt so dreadfully sorry for poor Kim Viceroy. She's such a delightful lady, is she not? She's really broken up about what happened to Mr. Reynolds. She feels terrible about moving the deceased corpse to the grove. But I can perfectly understand why she and her husband did it in the circumstances. In her shoes, I might have been tempted to do the very same thing, for the sake of the business, if I happened to own the inn. So we're not in a position to judge what they did. It's hard enough making a living out there these days, with so much competition out there, everywhere you look. Let's not kid. Something like that, getting out into the public domain, can be like an aggressive, fast-growing cancer. To eat your business alive. I didn't think of it like that, I will admit, I said, with my tail sitting very sternly between my legs. I did feel like a prize cad when I looked back at how I'd practically accused the lovely couple of insidiously harming one of their guests. That's your problem, Laurie. Sometimes you don't think, and it makes me hopping mad. It really, really does. You promised me you weren't going to upset anyone today. You gave me your solemn word. But no, you reduced Kim to tears. Well done on that one. What is wrong with you, Laurie? Why do you have to keep upsetting people like this all the time by saying things that are just not appropriate? People don't want you going spilling their secrets to all and sundry, do they? It's not a kind thing to do. What you did was downright unkind, Laurie. Get it? Unkind. I hope you're proud of yourself, because right now you make me so sick that I can't bear to look at you. I feel so ashamed. You've got the tact of a rhinoceros. And believe me, those things are thick-skinned. Well, I didn't mean to upset Kim. I'm just really sorry about that. I was just seeing everything so clearly in my visions. I couldn't help myself from blurting out what I was seeing, could I? Really? Said my wife, raising a cynical brow. You could have fooled me, Laurie. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that for a single second. I've known you all my life, well, virtually all my life, since I was 18 years old. You used to be one of the most tactful, diplomatic people I've ever met, and it was a noble quality I really admired about you. I'm sorry, but everyone has the ability to guard their tongue, and you would do well to do the same. If you go on spilling everybody's secrets, you'll end up acquiring an ocean of enemies. And let's not kid. Some people have been killed over revealing secrets. Even the Bible tells us we should guard our tongues. If you must know, I think Kim Viceroy was relieved that I was talking about Mr. Reynolds' death. I think she was very glad to get the subject off her chest. Oh, goodness gracious, listen to yourself. You are so delusional, Laurie, so delusional. You really believe that? Well, then you're a bigger fool than I thought you were. I'm quite sure Kim Viceroy didn't want to be reminded of any of that. Kim is not telling us everything she knows, I said. She knows what happened to Mr. Reynolds' deceased body when it was moved away from the wood grove. My wife's face reddened. She pointed an accusing finger at me, and her dagger-like looks would have made any self-respecting man shut up almost at once. Don't you dare! Don't you dare, Laurie, go uttering a single word about your preposterous theories to Kim. Do you understand, Laurie? That woman is struggling to get over her grief for what happened to Mr. Reynolds' body. You saw how remorseful she was. She broke down into tears thanks to you and your candid remarks. The last thing she needs is you ruffling her feathers up again and asking her any more awkward questions. As I was telling you, Pegs, she knows more than she's saying, Kim Viceroy. She's keeping a secret. Mind your own bloody business, Laurie. For once in your life, keep your zip shut, will you? Mr. Reynolds' death was due to natural causes. You and I both know that. The coroner confirmed as much. How the body got transferred from the woods to a farmer's field 2 hours away is absolutely none of our business. Either way, I don't care a hoot about it. For God's sake, let sleeping dogs lie, will you? I really like the Viceroys. And who knows what other job opportunities they might give us in the future, if we're so lucky. Do you want to ruin it for us? No, of course I don't, I said solemnly, deciding that closing this conversation with my wife might be a good idea before she ate me alive. But I knew deep down in my heart that I wanted answers to the enigmatic questions that kept stampeding into my head like a herd of rampaging bull elephants. Even though I tried my best to push the questions aside, I could not help but feel that Kim was definitely keeping a secret. And she was also keeping the secret from her husband. The woman knew exactly what had happened to Mr. Reynolds' body. And one way or another, I would get the truth out of her. But I'd have to be clandestine in my approach, and very tactful, as my wife Peggy would be on to me like a vulture devouring a dead man's carcass, and ripping his flesh apart until nothing is left. Ostensibly, she was not best pleased with me that night. When I tried my utmost to snuggle up to her in bed, she pushed me away brusquely and told me not to touch her. I need my space, Laurie. Please don't crowd me, will you? You've caused me enough distress already, and now you want to touch me. Are you kidding me? I'm so angry with you at the moment that I just need to let off some steam. So leave me in peace, will you? It was the following morning over the breakfast table, when a delicious spread was laid out before me and my wife, from Danish pastries to croissants, cold meats, breads and fruit. A continental breakfast, I believe they call it. That I saw my perfect opportunity to get some private time with Kim Viceroy. She told us, very matter-of-factly, that she was going to take a walk in the woods after breakfast. This greatly surprised me. I love this time of the year. The weather's absolutely perfect, the temperatures are idyllic, and the golden showers on the trees are spectacular. She paused for a brief moment and said, In case you're wondering, I'm not concerned about going into the woods. Despite everything that happened with Mr. Reynolds' body, I still feel safe in those woods, believe it or not. But are you sure that's a very good idea? Said Peggy. I don't mean to interfere, but I mean somebody stole Mr. Reynolds' body from those woods. Isn't the place a bit creepy, perhaps? That's the funny thing, it's absolutely not creepy. The woods are alive with pretty birdsong, and the trails are beautiful. It's anything but creepy. I'm quite sure, Peggy, that Kim wouldn't be going into the woods if she didn't feel safe in there. What happened to the late Mr. Reynolds is an isolated incident, I'm most sure. So you're going to the woods, are you, Kim? I said very eagerly, turning to look directly at her, unable to disguise the enthusiasm that rippled across my face in a wild, ebullient, childlike grin. What a very good idea. It's a very beautiful day today. Would you mind most awfully if I joined you? I could do with getting some exercise, and while I'm at it, I might as well take some photographs for the glossy cover spread. People always appreciate woodland scenery, do they not? My wife shot me a warning look, but I willfully ignored her and said, As I was saying, exercise will do me good. Would you like to come along, sweetheart? I said, turning to my wife and giving her a nauseating saccharine sweet smile that I knew was making her recoil in disgust. Sometimes I got an odd sense of satisfaction in winding up my wife, because she always looked so very cute when she got cross. You know, I can't possibly come for a walk in the woods with you, Laurie, my wife said, looking annoyed. Can't you see I'm still wearing this wretched brace on my foot? The doctor said it won't be fixed for another 6 weeks or so. But you knew that already, didn't you, Laurie? I inwardly smiled, for I knew my wife had been instructed not to exercise her ankle for a few weeks, as it had been badly broken when she slipped at the gym on a rebounder of all things. Oh, I forgot about your ankle. Oh, what a pity, my cherub. It would have been great if you could have come and joined us. I lied. My wife glared at me.
You're welcome to join me on my walk, Laurie, said Kim. Actually, I'd appreciate the company. And I do think if you bring your camera along, you could get some great shots of the scenery.
She turned around to look at my wife sympathetically.
I'm so sorry about your ankle, Peggy. It's a bummer you can't join us on the walk. My husband can't come with us because he's already gone to town, but he'll be back shortly. But while we're away, just make yourself comfortable. Help yourself to coffee, anything you fancy.
How thoughtful of you, Kim. That's so kind of you. But don't you worry about me. Go off and enjoy yourself in the woodgrove. I've got lots to do to prepare for the photographs. I've got plenty to keep me occupied, and I'm sure your husband will be back any time soon. As I was leaving for the walk, my wife leaned over to whisper in my ear, I hope you're not up to any mischief, Laurie. If I've found you've upset Kim in any way, there will be hell to pay. Do you understand? I don't know what games you're playing, but I'm on to you, Laurie. I'm watching you like a hawk. I'm sure you are, sweetheart, and don't I know it? I said very innocently, blowing her an exaggerated but very sweet kiss. My wife frowned at me, giving me a formidable glare. I knew that wife of mine could read me like a book. She could smell mischief on me, clearer than the brute aftershave that I was wearing. She was not remotely impressed with me of late. I felt somewhat sheepish and rather guilty as I sashayed through the grove with Kim Viceroy at my side, wondering how I would be able to tell Kim that I knew she knew more about what had happened to the late Mr. Reynolds' body. There would be hell to pay with my wife if I upset this woman any more than I had already done so. Kim seemed reasonably happy that morning. She was in a contented, docile, relaxed state. I was rather relieved to see she was carrying no resentment or bitterness towards me, after what had transpired the previous day, when my rude outbursts about my visions had taken central stage and rather ruffled up the Viceroy's feathers. I really think my Peggy could take some tips from Kim Viceroy, because my wife was like a bear with a sore head. If I ever did anything to aggrieve her, she'd never let me forget it in a hurry, and had been known to pout for days on end when she wasn't pleased with me. Kim was extremely different in that regard. She didn't take herself too seriously, and seemed to go with the flow of life, rather like a paper boat on a stream. I wish Peggy could be more easygoing like that. I wouldn't blame her for despising me, Kim I mean, after the things I'd said that had made her face an inauspicious event that she would rarely rather forget. I had pretty much dragged her to an old memory, like pushing a dog's nose back into its vomit. Kim was the kind of person I could see who was quick to forgive, but she surprised me when she pointed to the spot where she and her husband had left the body of the late Mr. Reynolds.
We left him over there, under that tree, she told me. But then I expect you know that already, don't you, Laurie? She said, looking at me pointedly. I mean, you probably saw this place in your vision, did you not?
No, I didn't, if you must know. In my vision I saw the deceased corpse of Mr. Reynolds being dragged on a blue tarpaulin by the two of you, and being laid out on some leaves in a wooded area. As far as I was concerned, it could have been anywhere. I could see you and your husband doing it, and how distressed you invariably were. But to tell you the truth, it was like looking at a scene at the theatre, and the curtain closes and the scene is over, so I don't get to see anything else. So no, I don't know everything, I explained. Sometimes I get insights, flashbacks, pictures in my head. There are times I can even read people's thoughts. But other times I might as well be looking at a blank piece of paper, because I can't see anything. Do you like this gift you acquired after that skiing accident? Kim asked me curiously. I mean, you gave me quite the shock when you told me about what me and my husband had done to Mr. Reynolds' body. My husband was upset that I confessed everything to you. But I suppose it was kind of good to tell someone what had happened. You don't think I'm a monster, do you, Laurie? I mean, this was my idea, you know. Monster? Goodness gracious me, no. You're not a monster, Kim. You did what you felt was right at the time. But it wasn't like you were harming Mr. Reynolds, was it? He was already deceased. If you must know, it's a bit of a curse being able to see things like I do. This was probably my quintessential perfect moment to say, but I do know that you're hiding something, because you know what happened to Mr. Reynolds, don't you? But I just couldn't bring myself to say it to her. I kept getting visions of Peggy telling me that she knew I couldn't be trusted to keep my zip shut. I was right, wasn't I, Laurie? She would likely say. You thought you would go into the woodgrove on the pretence you wanted a leisurely walk, when all the time you wanted to get Kim Vickeroy to talk about what she believed had happened to Mr. Reynolds when his body was teleported from one place to another. I knew it all along. I knew you couldn't be trusted. We continued to sashay down the earthen paths, and I was enjoying the walk, I have to say. Kim had lived in Buffalo for many, many years, so she talked to me at length about the place, and I was pleasantly surprised to find we had friends in common. On our walk I realized my wife was right. Much as I wanted to extract more information out of Kim about how the late Mr. Reynolds' body had disappeared from the woodgrove, I just couldn't ask her about the matter, almost as if my wife's scolding had finally made my tongue tie itself into a great big knot. So speaking about anything that might make my wife blow up like a berry in indignation had somehow made me become a much more tactful person. Of course, it was none of my business what had happened to the body of Mr. Reynolds, how it had been transported from this woodgrove to a farmer's field 2 hours away from Stowe. My problem was I was an interfering busybody, wasn't I? I just liked to know things. I had an unquenchable curiosity. In a trice, Kim suddenly stopped short in her tracks. "Did you hear that?" she asked me. "You must have heard that. Surely you heard that." I looked at her blankly. "I didn't hear anything," I said. "What was I supposed to hear?" I asked her. "But haven't you noticed? That's the whole point. There's nothing. There's no sound. The woods have become so quiet," said Kim. "I have a sense we're not alone." I was surprised that Kim didn't look panicked, but more intrigued, almost as if she knew not only that someone was there watching us, but exactly who that someone was. "Oh my God! They're back again! Can you hear them?" she asked me. That was when I heard heavy feet thumping across the forest floor, twigs being snapped, branches being broken, leaves being crunched. And then amongst those noises I heard 2 very discernible voices, speaking in a strange, very unusual language. And that was when I saw them. Kim did not react with any fear, but stoically appeared to stand her ground, which I couldn't easily comprehend, given how easily she had burst into tears the previous day. I had automatically assumed that the easy-going Kim had another side to her character that was over-emotional, very sensitive, taking everything to heart. But out here in the grove she was showing me up by being more level-headed and composed than I was being. I was the one that looked like I'd put my hand through an electric socket, so that every hair on my body was standing up on end, so much so that I lightly resembled Sonic the Hedgehog. I've never known my whole body to become as rickety as an old rocking chair, but I began to quiver and shake, as such was my earnest trepidation. Kim, who was standing next to me, had put an arm around me and was holding me up so I didn't fall over and faint. I always believed that the natural instinct to run away when you're facing your biggest fear will oblige you graciously with a much-needed adrenal response. So much like a bullet being fired, you can take off like a rocket. The mortifying reality was I was frozen to the spot, incapable of even moving a muscle. I stared incredulously, feeling rather bemused at the two humanoid creatures. They were titanic in size. I became mindfully aware of how pathetically small, vulnerable, and weak I was by contrast. What happened next was absolutely confounding. The Bigfoots were staring at both of us, but they didn't appear to look as if they'd been caught off guard in any way, nor did they seem remotely surprised to see us. On the contrary, it felt like this unlikely rendezvous had been preordained, almost as if God himself had orchestrated this unlikely union or meeting between souls. When the male Bigfoot spoke to us, his voice boomed through the grove. His words were powerful and eloquent, and although he was speaking in his own native tongue, this time he turned around to look directly at Kim, and I heard his words translated into English in my own mind, as clear as day. I honestly do not know how this happened. Kilani kwasina hom patilato hasikatali loko hoshani kilisana poloti. I'm glad to see you're not hiding from us this time. We knew exactly where you were when you were hiding last time. We feel energy. We see it too. We moved the deceased body for you far away from here. We didn't need it drawing attention to us. I just hope that wasn't an inconvenience for you in any way. The Bigfoot turned around, and this time he looked directly at me. He was pointing to the female Bigfoot, and said something to which the female Bigfoot nodded. It was something about me. I could feel it in every bone in my body. It was almost like they had spotted that I had spinach on my teeth, and were trying to point it out to me. Finally, the male Bigfoot spoke again. Ha kina nilonobo. Ha tila tila kwa, hom san silana, kolo tila tanaso, ha kila sana kwa. Why is your spirit window open? He shook his head. That's not good news. You don't want your spirit window open, for it can invite in unclean spirits to enter your body, and walk-ins into your very soul. You don't want that, do you? There is evil in this world, and it's always looking for a doorway in which it can enter. I knew I could feel a spirit window open somewhere. I could feel the draft from miles away, but I didn't expect it to be on you. I make it my business to keep portals closed at all times, because some of the things that come through those open doors are dangerous. They could potentially eat you alive, if given the chance. Some of your kind have been taken through open portals, never ever to be seen again. The male Bigfoot seemed to be thinking for a moment. He scratched his head thoughtfully, and then he said, Kati kwasana, akinato, ma tilani kwasana, janikali sokolo, paki sakalana. That's it. I think you must have crossed over to the other side prematurely, when it was not your time to die. You were flung out of your body, were you not? It can cause much upset and confusion. Your spirit still hasn't settled down from the impact of that experience, which is why the window was flung wide open. It's hardly a surprise, I suppose. Sometimes when you're flung out of your body unexpectedly, the spirit window opens, and it can cause great issues in your life. Don't you worry, I will correct it for you, because something untoward might enter the window and cause chaos in your life, and we can't have that, can we? It was the female Bigfoot that spoke next. It was almost like she was asking me permission to let my spirit window be closed. I realized later that what the Bigfoots were referring to was my psychic abilities, the way I could see things that I shouldn't see, and know things I shouldn't know, that had happened after that skiing accident in Switzerland. I can only assume that that was the spirit window to which she was referring to. Kila tinaqua, baka sinatala, kolopono tila sikati. Let him do it for you. He knows what he's doing. He likes to help where he can. You'll feel so much better for it, I promise you that. Before I knew it, I found myself staring into the male Bigfoot's eyes. He had drawn my attention to him by waving his hands, and it was almost like I was diving into a warm ocean of turquoise water, even though the Bigfoot's eyes were brown. When I did this, I felt swaddled in a warm, loving energy, and it was like a light inside of me that was not supposed to be on was switched off, and almost immediately I felt so much better, as finally I felt more grounded. "It is done," said the male Bigfoot. "Ka ki konopotana ha silasana tua, kon toloni pata, salikani kolokoshani sawa." I knew we were supposed to have a mission today of some sort. You were obviously called in the grove for us to help you. I'm glad we have been of service to you. May God be with you. The Bigfoots then turned around and were gone, leaving me and Kim Viceroy staring at each other in absolute bewilderment. "What did he do to you?" Kim asked me. "I saw a flash of light go off in your eyes. What was that about?" "I think the electric mains to my psychic ability has been cut off, if you like. That's what I believe has happened. And if the truth be told, I feel so much better for it. Much more like my old self before the accident in Switzerland. Ever since then, I've always felt a bit unhinged, as if a part of me was loosely fitting and needed to be tightened, if you know what I mean."
I suppose I do. Well, that's going to be a huge relief for you, isn't it? Not having all that psychic stuff bothering you the whole time.
She looked at me and said,
"Now you know exactly what happened to Mr. Reynolds' body. But please don't tell anybody about that. Pinky, promise?"
We both linked our pinky fingers together, making an agreement. I would never tell her secret to anyone. We walked back to the inn, both of us deeply impacted by our strange encounter with two remarkable Bigfoot, and not wishing in the slightest to share our experience with anyone, even with our most nearest and dearest, and especially not my wife Peggy. These days, when I think about that very unlikely event, I ask myself, did that really happen? But I know that it did. I'm very glad that my spirit window has been permanently closed. I did not enjoy having psychic ability. It was so frustrating. Peggy is delighted about this, of course, because I don't go around causing her dreadful embarrassment. These days we have 2 children and 2 dogs running around the place. Peggy stays at home as a stay-at-home mum, while I go off on trips taking photographs for people. But let's just say, none of those trips are more memorable to me than my idiosyncratic visit to the White Owl Inn, where I still remain in touch with Kim and her husband. But she claims she hasn't seen the Bigfoots again. So there you are. That is my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.